lunch ended, and the servants removed the tableware and went to the kitchen. The wind and rain neither weakened nor strengthened the island's remaining. Neither weakened nor strengthened, and the island remained cut off from the outside world. At first, it seemed. Holy shit! I can't read. The stream just started. At first, it seemed as though Natsuhi planned to stop anyone from taking a step outside the room. But when it came time to prepare lunch, she finally realized this would be impossible. However, in order to avoid having anyone alone in the kitchen, she told the 3 servants to go together. Because of that, the servants were the first ones given the right to leave the stuffy parlor, which had been packed with 11 people. Since breakfast had immediately followed that terrible incident, preventing most of us from eating much, everyone tore into their lunches in silence.
私が洗いますから、源氏さんとカノン君は少し休んでいてくださいな。何か飲みます？
私は結構。カノンは？
僕も結構です。
お二人とも早朝から大変だったでしょう。参ってしまうのも仕方ないことですよ。
The only noise was that of Kumasawa washing dishes, which resounded throughout the kitchen. Genji and Kanon sat in some chairs a short distance away, their eyes lightly closed. Just as Kumasawa had said, those two had probably built up a great deal of fatigue. But that didn't mean they couldn't let it show in front of the relatives. Avoiding that was one of their virtues. After the silence had continued for some time, Kanon opened his mouth and muttered.
Shannon, どうしてあんなひどい死に方を。
死に方のことは忘れなさい。ただ、運がなかっただけだ。
そうですね。ただ、運がなかっただけです。
They both fell silent once again. Kanon's expression was filled with grief.
シャノンちゃんが死んじゃったなんて、未だに信じられませんよ。本当にかわいそうに。もう会えないなんて嘘みたいですよ。もう一度、あの子の笑顔が見たかったのに。
Kumazawa spoke with her back facing them. After all, Kumazawa hadn't seen Shannon's corpse, so she had no trouble mentioning Shannon's face. When Kanon heard those words, it reminded him again of how only half of Shannon's face had been left, and his grieving expression twisted even further.
どうしてベアトリーチェ様はシャノンを？生贄が欲しかったなら、他にも大勢いただろうに。どうして？
Now, I know the characters are all still, like, grieving over this and wondering how this could have happened, but again, we have this note, right? Like, we've got this. We know at the very end of this, only one of them's gonna remain. This isn't really much of a spoiler. Anyone can deduce this, which means that out of the entire cast of characters, of the, how many are left? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12? Out of the 12 or 11 and 1 missing characters, they're all going to die except for one of them. How they die, who knows? But it's pretty obvious that they're all gonna be, if their faces are not gonna be missing, they're gonna be chopped up or they're gonna be shot or something. This isn't much of a, you know, the game doesn't leave much of a surprise left over, I guess. We just have to, I guess the mystery now is who dies and how. But anyway.
ただ、運が悪かっただけだ。少しの運がたがえば、シャノンの代わりにあそこに横たわっていたのは、あるいは他の誰かだったのかもしれない。すべては運命だ。
源氏様、奥様の部屋の扉に血のような跡がついていたとおっしゃっていましたね。シャッターに書かれていたのと同じもので。
うん。気味の悪い跡だった。まるで血のついた指でドアノブを引き抜こうとするかのような部屋。 扉をかき破ろうとしたのか。そんな君の悪い後だった。
ベアトリーチェ様が奥様の部屋を訪れて、そして扉を開こうとしたけれど、
Yeah.
開けなかった。
Genji thought back to the time he had seen those traces of blood on the door to Natsu's room. With the substance sticking to the door around the doorknob and the marks of something scratching against the door, it had definitely appeared as though someone had tried to open the door, but couldn't.
どうして奥様は生贄を免れたんだ。もし奥様が選ばれてたなら、シャノンは
Yeah.
シャノンは死ななくて済んだのに。
Technically, Kanon should not be having these thoughts, especially out loud, but, yeah. This is basically, like, what I mentioned last time, as well. Where we're like, okay, so who's, like, missing, and that basically the only reason why she survived instead of Shannon was because she had the charm around her doorknob. Just then, a loud, sharp noise came in from the hall. Both of them turned around, surprised.
面白そうな話じゃねえか。俺も混ぜてくれよ。
Before any of the servants realized it, Battler was standing in the doorway to the kitchen.
バトラ様、これは失礼いたしました。
Yeah, very rude. Genji and Kanon stood up, surprised, and hastily bowed. But I didn't care about stuff like that. I was more concerned with continuing their discussion.
便所って言って抜けさせてもらったのさ。ずっとあの部屋に閉じ込められてると窒息しちまいそうだったからな。水でも飲ませてもらおうかと思ったら、面白そうな話が聞こえてきたんでよ。頭なんか下げなくていいぜ。今の話の続きを聞かせてくれよ。
今のは別に。
ちょいと前から話は聞かせてもらってるんだ。今さら隠すなよ。だからベアトリーチェってのは何者だ。どうやらおとぎ話の魔女ってだけじゃなさそうだな。
Right, like from their perspective, when he's like, let me hear the rest, he probably thought he was talking about like, or hold on, let me, like the specific wording that he used. Yeah, he's like, so please let me hear the rest of your chat. And he's like, it's not like that. You know, it's not like he was wishing for their deaths or something, even though he was. But the way Battler said, like, hey, let me hear the rest, it probably sounded like, you know, a scornful, like, I don't know, rich person telling a servant, well, why don't you fucking continue what you were saying, bitch? You know, something along those lines. But Battler obviously isn't that way. Kanon averted his gaze. It was obvious that he didn't want to talk about this, which only made me want to ask even more. While making an effort to smile, I grabbed the collar of his shirt.
昨べまでなら俺は無関係さ。だがな、今朝からは違う。親父たちを殺された時点で、俺は立派な関係者だ。俺にも、そのうさんくさそうな話を聞かせてもらう資格があるはずだぜ。
I glared into Kanon's eyes as he continued to avert his gaze in apparent pain. Since there was a big difference in our heights, Kanon had to stand on his toes, and it looked like it hurt a bit.
バトラさん、手を離してやってくださいな。別にカノンさんは隠しているわけではないのです。
じゃあ話してくれたっていいじゃねえか。仲間外れたら寂しいぜ。
When I tried to further twist up his collar, Genji cut between us and spoke. In his expression were faint traces that he'd made up his mind to do something. Apparently, he had no intention of hiding it.
お話しすることはできます。ただバトラ様がお気を悪くなされるかもしれませんので、カノンは躊躇
なんて男らしくねえぜ。内緒にされる方が気持ち悪いさ。聞かせてくれよ。どうせ明日までできることはないんだ。 多少はうさんくさい話の方が退屈も紛れるってもんだぜ。
Genji and Kanon looked at each other and, then nodded as though they decided to talk.
わかりました。何でもお聞きください。お話しします。
ああ。
It still boggles me, by the way, that Battler's voice actor is Akasaka's voice actor from Higurashi. Like, their characters are like complete opposites. And then just like I've gotten used to Battler's voice, but it's still so jarring remembering. Oh yeah, this guy was like a Japanese Fed in another timeline, in some other world, in a book that this guy was reading.
じゃあ聞くぜ。ベアトリーチェってのは一体何なんだ？俺が知ってる限りでは、ロケン島の森に住まう魔女ってことになってる。森に入ると危ないからってんで、ばあ様あたりが作り出した脅し話だって聞いてる。違うのか？
いえ、違いません。その通りです。ベアトリーチェ様は、六軒島の森に住まわれる魔女であらせられます。
マトラ様、にわかには信じられないでしょうが、ベアトリーチェ様は存在するのです。親方様に莫大な黄金を授け、長いことおそばにお仕えした実在する方なのです。
はあ？よせやいよせやい。じい様の受け売りを言うのも給料のうちだってのか？
I laughed like it was a joke, but neither Genji nor Kanon laughed. Not even Kumasawa, who was avoiding my eyes, flustered as she started washing dishes. So, unfortunately, I was the only one laughing. Painfully, bitterly.
なるほど。こいつは確かに正気じゃ気を悪くする。つまり、ベアトリーチェっていう名の人物は実在するんだな。
はい。親方様がこの島にお屋敷を構える以前から、おそらく私よりも長くお仕えしているでしょ
う。なんてこった。桐江さんの仮説は外れたな。じい様にベアトリーチェという名の腹心は実在したってわけだ。そいつは今この島にいるんだな。
はい、いらっしゃっていると思います。
曖昧な言い方だな。ってことは昨日今日そいつの顔を見たってわけじゃなさそうだな。
はい、大変申し上げがたいのですが、その。
Kanon once again dropped his gaze, avoiding my eyes. It's cool when he was like, so Beatrice is on the island, right? And then Kanon said, that is correct. The moment he said that, lightning roared in the background, which is really fucking cool.
なんだよ、そこで切るなよ。鮮度目みたいで気持ち悪いぜ。
I urged him on jokingly again. However, it looked like Kanon was still confused as to whether he should speak or not. Then Kumasawa whispered.
お顔を見ようにも、ベアトリーチェ様にはお姿がありませんから。
え？
お姿が？なんだって？
ベアトリーチェ様にはお体がありません。ですから、ベアトリーチェ様がお望みにならない限り、私ども凡庸。
ベアトリーチェ様が人の姿をされていた頃の絵が、あの肖像画のものなのだとか。そのお姿を懐かしみ、よく肖像画の前に佇まれているそうな。
ベアトリーチェ様は時折、輝く蝶の姿に身を変えられて現れることがあります。万一、お屋敷の中でお見かけした場合には、決してその後を追ってはならない決まりです。追えば不幸があると囁かれています。 その禁を破り、大怪我をして辞めた使用人も実際にいます。
So she has no body. In general. Praise, kill, 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 kill. The witch shall revive, and none shall be left alive. So this either means that she's invisible the entire time, which is likely. She has no physical form, literally, either because she is just a spirit of sorts, or maybe she's stuck between dimensions, or she's maybe like Rika and is in a pocket, is in a pocket dimension. But yeah, like the witch will revive on the ninth night. She'll be alive for a day, and on the 10th twilight at the journey's end, you shall attain the power to the Golden Land's treasures, once and for the last time. But yeah, everyone will die on the 19th, or sorry, on the 10th twilight. So it could be all 18 of them, all 19 of them. Again, this is assuming whether or not Beatrice is the 19th person, and there isn't anybody else here that's alive. But if we do check our characters, there is one spot missing between Maria and her mom. And even though that's supposed to be the family tree, it could be someone else. In between Nanjo and Genji. That's my guess for the spot for Beatrice. But anyway.
おいおい、マジかよ。あんたら、本気でそんな話をしているのかよ。
バトラス様、すでにベアトリーチェ様がお越しになっておられます。そのようなお言葉はよろしくないかと思われます。
ベアトリーチェ様はご自身を冒涜される方を好みません。
Wait, he said yoroshikunai, which is like unwelcome instead of unwise. Unless he was referring to her arrival. But anyway.
その存在を疑えば必ずや不幸が降りかかるでしょう。
バトラさん、気持ちの悪いお話とお思いでしょ。ですがね、ベアトリーチェ様はいるんですよ。
います。それを疑われることをベアトリーチェ様は
わかりませんか、バトラ様。ベアトリーチェ様は今すでにここにお越し。
おいおい、よせよ。
I keep skipping by accident.
俺、そういうのは弱いんだぜ。脅しっこなしにしろい。
However, there was no trace of a joke in the eyes of the three servants. On the surface, I laughed and tried to look unconcerned, but I was quickly starting to sober up. Their eyes were also sobering up fast.
バトラさん、お願いですから、ベアトリーチェ様を冒涜することはおやめください。悪いことは申し上げません。
Kumasawa, who was usually cheerful and would always tease people, now spoke with a totally serious face.
いや、いるって言われてもよ。俺には何も見えないぜ。今、俺の隣にいるとでも言うのかよ。
I thought they were gonna stop everything. Stop all the audio and then just show Beatrice.
冗談よせやい。
Just then, that unnerving laugh suddenly filled the kitchen. When I turned around, Maria was standing there by the entrance, but her expression and the feeling about her, her presence, felt exactly the same as the servants.
波長の合う合わないは生まれつきだよ。バトラは生まれつき波長が合わないタイプなんだよ。だから見えない。会えない。話せない。ベアトリーチェの一番嫌いなタイプだよ。
Maria laughed like it was funny, but sounded extremely eerie. It was almost like she was laughing at me, because I alone didn't understand.
ベアトリーチェのことが知りたい？ベアトリーチェはね、1000年の魔女なんだよ。あらゆる悪魔を刺激し、錬金術を極め、賢者の石を生み出し、莫大な黄金を生み出すことができる。おじいさまは彼女と契約することで、後ろ宮家に莫大な富を築いたんだよ。
Okay, so before this continues a little bit. If real, right, if she is real, and if what Maria is saying is true. So she did discover the ability to, you know, transmute gold, right, which is just making gold out of nothing, basically. Which is usually done through alchemy. If you look into, like, alchemists that existed throughout history, that was their main goal. Trying to figure out how to make gold. It was basically just chemistry. But they were trying to create gold specifically, and it wasn't possible. So if that's one thing that she could do, the other thing that interests me is the Philosopher's Stone. So it depends on, like, what media or what source you want to look into. If you look at modern media, the Philosopher's Stone can be like one of like 15,000 different things. Originally, from what I remember, it's been a while since I've looked into it, it's just a stone that allows you to basically see or know anything you want. As for how it works specifically, it depends on, like, the source. Again, some say you just hold it and you'll know instantly whatever it is that you want to see. Some, like others, like in more like fantasy novels, they describe it like it projects something. It'll project a little image above it. It'll glow. Others think the Philosopher's Stone is like imagine like a gemstone, or imagine like a piece of amber, right? Like just a stone that you can see through. And inside of the Philosopher's Stone is whatever it is that you're thinking of. If you're like, I don't know, where did I drop, like, my pen? And then you look in the Philosopher's Stone, and then it'll be like, oh, it's behind your couch. Or it's under your desk. You know, for a very, like, stupid example, but you get what I mean. Others think that, like, if you think that question, like, hey, where did I leave my pen? It'll appear in your head. Where it'll be like, oh, you know, you left it, it's under your desk, or check under your desk. It all depends on how they want to roll with it in this game, assuming that thing is real. But this is quite interesting that Beatrice is able to, like, if she's able, the fact that she's able to just make gold, it just shows you how powerful she is. Because a lot of alchemists were very, I was going to say stupid, but they were just incapable of doing it. Because it's very hard to make gold out of nothing. Especially, you know, like 300 years ago, or 400. And then the Philosopher's Stone was just something that people would search for, but that's about it. Anyway.
昨日私がベアトリーチェの手紙を読んだでしょ？あれは本当なんだよ。バトラに信じろと言っても無理な話だろうけど。六感が生まれつきさっぱりみたいだからね。
なんだよそれ。魔女？悪魔？そんなの誰に聞いたんだよ。
ベアトリーチェ本人に聞いたんだよ。
Maria kept doing that unpleasant laugh. However, the servants who watched over this didn't even blink. She heard it from that witch in the portrait adorning the entrance hall. Maria kept on laughing in a weird voice, as though this was nothing more or less than the truth.
マリア、 聞くだけ野暮だろうが、もう一回聞くぜ。昨日、マリアにあの手紙を渡したのは誰だ？
ベアトリーチェにもらったって何度言えばわかるかな？わかんないよね。見えないんだもんね。信じられないもんね。
Just then, Maria's laughter suddenly stopped.
バトラ、まだわかんない？ベアトリーチェ様がいるのが。
いるって、どこにさ？
だからベアトリーチェ様がここにいるのが。
That's right. Now that I think about it, I've been feeling for a while now that Now that I think about it, I've been feeling for a while now that the servants' eyes haven't been pointed in quite the right direction. I'd figured they were just staring absent-mindedly, but that wasn't the case. The four here, Genji, Kanon, Kumasawa, and Maria, everyone except me, was looking at a spot right behind me. Holding my breath tightly, I slowly looked over my shoulder. Of course, there wasn't anyone there. I've known that the whole time. However, everyone in the room, except for me, was focusing on that point, as if there was someone there.
ベアトリーチェは1000年を生きた偉大な黄金の魔女。でも波長の合う人間にしか自分の姿を見せられないし、話しかけられない。だからね、それがとても悲しいんだよ。だからバトラみたいな生まれつき魔法のセンスもかけらのない人に存在を否定されるのがものすごく嫌いなんだよ。バトラは幸運だよ。昨日私にお守りをもらっていてよかったね。それを身につけていなかったら、今頃ベアトリーチェのどんな呪いが身に及んでいたか分かったものじゃない。本当に幸運なんだよ、バトラは。
Yeah, right, Maria. That also means that ghosts are real.
ああ、あのサソリのキーホルダーかよ。あれって安っぽい景品か何かだと思ってたんだが、ちとはご利益あったってことなのか？
Battler does have his shit-eating grin right now. But this dude is definitely shitting himself as we speak.
それがなかったら今頃バトラがあの倉庫の中で顔面を砕かれて生贄にされていたんだよ。幸運だったよ、バトラは。
Yeah, he's capital S stressed. That's why his suit is yellow, so you can't see that he pissed himself.
そうか。あれがなかったら、俺は今頃殺されてたってのか。
He's gonna take it off. Oh no.
なんでバトラはベアトリーチェを信じないの？いるのに。今、そこに、ほら。ね、信じる気になったでしょ？信じなよ。マリアにお守りをもらったことを感謝しながら。あれがなければ、バトラは今頃倉庫の中。代わりに誰か一人が助かっていたかもしれないね。
Right then, I burst into laughter. Playing witches have been pretty fun up until a second ago, but unfortunately, that last one seemed to be too much for me to gloss over.
じゃあ全然ダメだぜ、マリア。ってことなら悪いが、全然ダメだ。
When Maria saw me suddenly start laughing, she stopped. Even though she didn't understand what I was laughing at, she realized it wouldn't be pleasant for her.
お前が傷つくだろうと思ったから、俺黙ってお前にもらったお守りよ。俺、ポケットに入れたつもりだったんだけどよ。どっかに落っことしちまったんだぜ。だから俺が今この瞬間に無事なのはお守りのおかげでもねえし。なら魔女様の悪いが、俺は自分の目で見たものしか信じねえ。第6巻波長魔法のセンス悪いが俺はそういう眉唾なもんは一切信じねえぜ。
The moon landing? Get the fuck out of here, Maria. That shit ain't real.
クラスの女が霊感がいいの悪いのって言い出すのを聞いてると虫唾が走るのさ。
Green screens in Hollywood. That's what it was.
あんたらがいくらじい様に給料もらってるか知らねえが、俺を妙な宗教に勧誘しようったってそう簡単にはいかねえってことをよく肝に銘じておきやがるってんだ。
バトラ様。
カノン君たちが信じるのは自由だぜ。だが俺が信じるかどうかは常に俺が自分で決める。マリーがこの目で見るまでベアトリーチェなんてうさんくさいものの存在を信じるわけにはいかないぜ。
Oh, it played the audio before the text on screen. Okay. I spoke forcefully and sharply. Then Maria started cackling again.
ならそれでいいんじゃない？いずれお前のような波長が全然合わない人の目にもベアトリーチェは見えるようになる。もうじき蘇るんだよ、ベアトリーチェはね。そうしたら一緒にいっぱいお話をしたり遊んだりしようって約束してるんだよ。疑う必要も無理に信じる必要も全くない。現れるんだよ、もうじきね。
Now, imagine this is true, right? Imagine Beatrice is real. Imagine Maria knows Beatrice is real. Maria sold out her family, her mother, her uncles, all because they were mean to her, and because Beatrice told her, hey, I'll talk to you, I'll play with you. This is like some insane grooming being done by a 1,000-year-old witch. I was gonna say something else, but I think that might put me on the list, so I will refrain from continuing that train of thought. But I'm sure those astute among us might be able to see where I'm going with this. Or I should laugh like her and be like, hee 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 hee. After a meal, some people tend to head to the bathroom, while others prefer to relax for a bit. It seemed that several people had left the parlor, just like I did when I went to the kitchen to drink some water. In the end, Aunt Nazi reluctantly retracted her order that everyone remain packed in the parlor, on the condition that no one headed out on their own or strayed too far. In any case, if 11 people are shut up in the same room starting early in the morning, the air will start to stagnate. Also, quite some time had passed, so everyone was starting to recover from the shock of that morning, and their sense of danger might have been weakening too. However, it was a certain fact that 6 people had been killed inside this mansion, so no one was completely negligent. So whenever they went out into the hallway for a breath of fresh air, trying to act tough, they would quickly get scared of standing there, isolated, and would eventually return to the parlor. I guess it's like the north wind and the sun. If you force someone to stay shut in, they'll resist. But if you tell them to do what they want, they'll come back obediently. People really do not like doing what they're told. When the servants finished cleaning up from the meal, they returned obediently to the parlor, just as Aunt Natsuhi had told them to, and sat on the sofa near the entrance, patiently awaiting orders. Maria, almost as though she had suddenly finished playing witches, had returned to the pure Maria I knew well, saying ooh ooh. What in the world happened back there? I hadn't even felt an atom of the presence of this person called Beatrice, who was supposedly standing behind me, invisible. However, it felt like I'd glimpsed a little of that presence inside Maria.
確かにマリアちゃんは魔女とかの話になると人が変わるね。昨日海岸でバトラ君も見たでしょ。
サソリのキーホルダーの時か？いや、あんな機嫌を損ねるみたいな感じじゃなくてよ。まるで二重人格みたいな感じで。
ああ、たまにそういうこともあるな。さっきマリアが魔法陣の話を始めた時みたいなやつ、たまーにあるぜ。気持ち悪いけどな。
Apparently, Jessica had spotted that kihihihi Maria a few times. I just happened to catch it at a bad moment and was pretty freaked out seeing it for the first time.
あれってのは何なんだ？マリアは二重人格か何かなのか？それとも本当に霊感が強かったりとかして、そういうのに憑依されたりとかしちまうのかよ。
そういうのじゃないと思うよ。バトラ君にも経験ない？小さい頃自分以外の誰かになりたかったなんてこと。
When humans are born, no one has any individuality. However, when they reach their growth period, their sense of self starts to be born. They want to be different than other people. But since everyone else in their class is learning the same things at the same rate and being forced into the same lifestyle, of course they aren't going to find anything that makes them different from anyone else around them. Once they realize that, the first thing they do is start breaking the rules in what's called the rebellious stage. Since everyone follows the rules, they want to show off their individuality by breaking them. So even those who try to act tough, mocking everyone around them and calling them childish, can actually be viewed as cute kids searching for themselves if you look at it this way. Well, I'm lecturing about all this like I'm so smart, but I actually got it secondhand from George Aniki. I myself was one of those embarrassing guys who thought it was cool to act like a bastard. Well, that was when I was at an age where you try to show off for the opposite sex.
成長期の根底には子供から脱却したいというひよこが殻を破るのに似た衝動がある。子供と大人の違いは何かわかるかい？
年齢？それとも体格？
違うよ。経験だよ。大人が子供を見下すのは人生経験が少ないからだよ。子供が何を言っても鼻で笑ってしまうのは世間知らずのくせにと見下しているからだよ。
ああ、そういうのわかるぜ。子供の頃って妙に人生ってもう悟りきったようなことを口にして年長者ぶりたくなるよな。大人は子供が何を言っても世の中甘くないとか社会に出ればわかるとか鼻で笑ってる。まあ実際そうなんだけど、子供的にはそういうのって見下されてるみたいでムカつくんだよな。
なるほどな。知識や経験の有無か。確かに年齢だけ無駄に食ってても尊敬はされねえよな。
となるとつまり子供から脱却したいという衝動を持つ時期にかつ他者とは違うという個性を持ちたくなる。子供からの脱却がつまり知識や経験なのだとしたら。
なるほど。他人の持ち得ない知識を持つことが一つのアイデンティティになるわけか。
小学校の頃なんかさ、クラスの誰も知らないことを知っていたり、 持っていたり身につけていたりするとヒーローになれたよな。バトラもそういう経験あるだろ？
あるある。何か一芸に秀でたいと思うお年頃って確かにあるな。なるほど。それが子供からの脱却、つまり成長期ってわけか。
健全な意味での成長期は、そうして没個性を脱却するために人が持たない知識やスキルを身につけることを促す。これは社会学的にも面白いことだよ。人が没個性を嫌うために人と違う技術を身につけようとする。これにより社会は幅広い技術を獲得して立脚する。神々の高度なプログラミングに驚かされるね。
Now, mind you, they're telling us all this so that we can understand how Maria is behaving, how she's going through her rebellious phase. But while our cast, let's say Battler, maybe got good at like Kempo or, I don't know, drawing or something, Maria instead decided to differentiate herself from her peers by learning about the dark arts and black magic.
まあ、個性がネガティブに働くこともあるぜ。クラスみんなが真剣に勉強してるから、俺だけはサボって目立とうとかよ。
Or if all your classmates are studying Japanese history and you have a book about black magic, everyone's gonna think that you're a fucking freak. They'll be like, hey, we're learning about, the fucking Edo period. The fuck are you doing? And you're like, oh, well, I'm reading up about, like, Solomon's Key and, the Knights Templar. People are gonna be like, huh? Solomon? Knights Templar? Bro, we're reading about the Edo period. You should pick up a fucking book and get with the program. And then that will they'll treat you like an outcast. In Japan, at least. In Japan, you'll be a lot more weird. In the West, people will probably just ignore you. Okay, that last bit really was true about me. It's only recently that I've been able to thank the middle school teacher who slapped me after school.
でもまあ、誰も飛べない飛び箱を飛んでやりたいとか、成績のいい連中を周回遅れにさせてやるぜって、マラソンで全力疾走とか、そういう勉強はダメだったから、少なくとも運動では見返してやるぜって根性はあった。なるほど。ちゃんと成長期してるな、俺。
男子ってやっぱり肉体的な方面に関心が向くよな。でもよ、同じ時期に女子は精神的な面に向きやすいんだよ。バトラのクラスの女子にも占いとか霊感とかそんなこと言ってる女子連中のグループがあったりしただろ？
あったあった。人の星座とか血液型とか聞いてきて、やっぱりクスクスとか笑われると大いにムカついたもんだぜ。どこのクラスに行っても女子は占いが好きだし、決まって霊感に強いだの弱いだの、感受性がどうこう、見えないものが見えちまうだの、そういう手合いが必ずいたもんだぜ。
I guess just some like really quick advice for those of you listening. If a girl ever comes up to you and asks you what your sign is, what your blood type is, and especially at what time were you born and what date, you stop talking to that person. Because they are more than likely literal freaks. And no matter how cute they might seem, how attractive they might seem, you get the fuck out of there ASAP. So just trust me on that one.
占いも霊感も学校では教えないものだからね。男の子と違い、内向的な世界に関心を持ちやすい女の子にとって、それはアイデンティティを確立しやすくて、かつ興味深いジャンルなんだよ。
男子が成長期に入ると 急に女子も成長期に入るとそういうのに興味が出るようになるんだよ。私はそうでもなかったけどさ。
つまりマリアがオカルトに関心を持つのは年頃の女の子としてはそう珍しくもないってことか。
Even if we accept that, I wonder if it explains that creepy dual personality thing. Actually, I think I could probably accept that explanation more or less.
さっきも言った通り、大人になるというのは知識や経験を持つことを言う。だからそれを得るために子供たちはいろいろなことを学んで子供を脱却しなければならないんだけど、子供の世界に今も昔もはびこっているある便利な妄想があるんだよ。わかるかい？
漫画やアニメに多いだろ。ほらあれだよ、前世の記憶が蘇ってとか、偉大なるなんとかの魂が乗り移ってとか。
他にも遺伝子が覚醒したりとか、封印されていた能力やら記憶やらが戻ったりとか、いろいろあるな。どういうわけか、あの時期はそういうのがやたらと流行るもんさ。どうしてだ？
今挙げたキーワードは全て子供の自分に知識や経験を直ちに付加できる幻想だからだよ。9歳の女の子も1000年を生きた魔女が私に憑依していると言い出せば1009歳のアイデンティティが得られるわけだからね。
Mom, you can't ground me. I'm 1009 years old.
まあつまり勉強するのは面倒くさい。でも人とは違うスキルを持って周りに威張りたい、ちやほやされたいっていう連中にとっては便利な妄想なんだよな。
So you could brag about something without having to work hard or study. I see. Isn't that a kid's greatest dream?
あとは子供からの脱却願望には必ず自分の理想像の自己投影が行われ、その願望の姿が別人格として形成されることが少なくない。バトラ君だって家と学校では多少キャラクターが違うということがあるんじゃないかな。多分家での自分の姿をクラスの友人たちに見せるのは恥ずかしいはずだよ。学校の自分は自分のなりたい姿の投影で、家の自分は本来の姿だから。
つまりキャラクターの使い分けというか、人格の多重化はごくごく当たり前だと言いたいわけか。
To an extent. In Jungian psychology, this would be called... Unfortunately, nowadays the word has been tainted. But in Jungian psychology, this would be known as a persona. Or, a quote-unquote mask that you wear for society. Right? When you're at home by yourself, your true self, with yourself, you are always yourself to you. But the thing with personas is that there are an infinite number of them, for lack of a better word. Because every person that you've ever interacted with has a fragment of you within them. For example, that fragment being a persona, or the persona of who you, the person listening to this, is like for that person. So, if you have, for example, a parent, right, like your mom or your dad, like your mom has a persona of you in her mind, and the you that exists in her mind is unique to her. She might see you still like as a baby or as a young child, even if you're an adult, even if you're in high school, even if you're 50. She might still see you as, her child. But even though, say for example, your dad is also your parent, the you that's in his head is completely different from the you that's in your head and the you that's in your mother's head. The same thing applies to any partners you might have had throughout your life, your friends, your teachers, your classmates, someone that you met on the street one day. Your persona probably still lingers in the back of their head if they ever remember, oh yeah, I met this weird guy one time in the middle of the street once. You know, for whatever reason. That's basically what they're kind of trying to establish here. I'm assuming they're going to go the Jungian psychology route, but just in case they don't, that's something to keep in mind. Nowadays, the word persona has been tainted. And by nowadays, I mean since 2006. That word has been tainted. So for 20 years, that word has not had its actual Jungian psychological meaning. Which is quite the shame. But anyway.
オカルトが好きな女子はそれを憑依と言ったり覚醒と言ったりするぜ。正直ドン引きするくらいにキャラを変える子もいるよ。男子にもいるだろ。キレたとか言ってやたらめったら粗暴キャラに変身するやつが。あれ本人はかっこいいと思ってるんだろうけど見てて痛いよな。
つまりおさらいするとだ。マリアくらいの年頃の女の子がさっきみたいな不気味な二重人格みたいなのを見せてもそれほど珍しいものじゃないと言いたいのか？
簡単にまとめるとそういうことだね。アイデンティティは自己を形成するための大切なもの。それをバカにしたりするとかえってその殻に閉じこもってしまうこともある。だからほどほどに付き合ってあげるのが大切なんだよ。それを丸ごと受け入れてあげるのが親の包容力というものなんだけどね。
兄貴、それで独身って信じられねえぜ。もう子供が中学くらいに上がってそうな貫禄さ。じゃあローザおばさんもあのマリアの二重人格についてはよく知っていたのかな？
知ってたぜ。ここだけの話、ローザおばさんはすっごく嫌がってた。気持ち悪いしクラスでますます孤立を深めるだけだって。だからマリアがオカルトの話を始めたり魔女みたいな声で笑い出したりすると必ずビンタしてたぜ。だからマリアもローザおばさんがいる時にはそういう話をしないようになったみたいだけど。
Maybe that thing back there was just a little game from a girl facing her growing period. Just a girl trying to show that she was different and independent by holding interest in witches and the occult. And since she wanted to be different from herself, young as she was switching between her normal personality and the personality of her ideal, a witch. At first, I found that very disturbing, but after being lectured by George Aniki, it felt like this was a path everyone walked down at one time or another. I haven't told anyone else, but when I was in kindergarten, I joined up with a little gang of kids trying to form an Earth Defense Force, saying we'd help protect peace on Earth. My face turns red when I remember how, during what we called battle practice, we would chant EDF, EDF. That's so fucking funny. Just like usual, Maria was relaxing, immersed in the TV, oohing and laughing just like any girl her age. But on the inside, another personality, that of the ideal witch she respected and blindly accepted, was sleeping. Her persona. But that wasn't anything extraordinary. It was perfectly natural for a girl of her age. It's so dumb. I've calmed down a little. The shock from my bizarre experience in the kitchen just now is fading away. If I hadn't talked to Aniki and Jessica, I might still be frightened by the idea that an invisible witch is standing right behind me. However, can I really accept that as an explanation for what happened back there? If it had just been Maria, I could have explained it as the fickle delusions of a growing girl. But Genji, Kanon, and Kumasawa had also been there. None of them had denied what Maria said. they silently accepted that Beatrice, quote unquote, exists. So once again, this is more of Ryukishi's writing being very good, where you just had a scene that was pretty, like, disturbing, right? Like, Battler was like, there's no way someone's right behind me, is there? And he turns around and they cut to black and nothing's there, but everyone's staring behind him. There's no way a witch is real. There's no way a witch is actually standing there. Right, Battler? So, they have that scene, and then they have a scene explaining, hey, well, here's why Maria is probably acting that way. Because kids her age like to pretend, and they like to have this little identity of themselves, like for themselves. And now, we're being shown what comes after. None of them had denied what Maria said. They silently accepted that Beatrice exists. I was starting to feel a little uneasy. Aunt Ava's position was that no 19th person existed, but the crime was an inside job tied to the family quarrels. On the other hand, Aunt Natsuhi's position was that the culprit was hiding somewhere outside the mansion. So she rejected the possibility of an inside job and supported the idea that a 19th person existed. In the kitchen, Maria and the servants had also supported the idea of a 19th person, but according to them, this 19th person isn't human. They said it was an invisible witch carrying out the mysterious plan, or some mysterious plan. Is there a 19th person, or not? And is the culprit human, or a witch? For some reason, I just couldn't laugh off any of those possibilities. Not even the most ridiculous story about the witch.
ジェシカ、ベアトリーチェの話ってのは、俺の認識では森に子供たちが迷い込まないようにってんで作った大人の脅し話だってことになってんだが、この屋敷じゃ違うのか？
私もバトラと同じ意見だぜ。こんなのは子供に言うことを聞かせるために親が作った間抜けな怪談だと思ってる。でもそうだと口にはできない空気が屋敷内にあることは否めないな。
おじい様がベアトリーチェは存在すると公言されているからね。使用人たちは立場上それを疑えないし、クラウスおじさんたちもおじい様と喧嘩がしたいわけもないから、だから多分このお屋敷ではベアトリーチェの存在を疑うことはある種のタブーだと思うんだよ。年に一度しか来ない僕たちと違ってね。そうでしょ。
Jessica took a deep breath in admiration. It looked like Aniki had guessed right.
ジョージ兄さんの言う通りだぜ。みんな腹の中じゃ信じてるわけじゃない。でも表向きはその存在を認めてる。ほら、神様の存在を認めるようなそんな雰囲気だよ。実際にはいないことを知ってても、それを口に出して否定したら野暮みたいな空気だな。
使用人たちの間ではどういうことになってんだ？やっぱり雇い主のじい様がいるって言ってんだから、それに口調を合わせてるわけ。
さあ、詳しくはわからないけど、使用人たちの間ではベアトリーチェの話はある種の怪談扱いになってるよ。ほら、昨日海岸でシャノンが話してくれたろ。夜見回りをしている時、不気味な何かを見かけたとか、そういう話。
She did say something like that, didn't she? Back then, I thought she was just being really nice to help improve Maria's mood, but it felt like she was serious when she said it. That's right. She definitely said it. She definitely said the same kind of thing that Genji and the rest had all unanimously declared back in the kitchen.
他にも鬼火や輝く蝶々が舞っているのを見たという使用人も。 カノン君もそれらしいものを以前夜の見回りの時に見たことがあると言ってました。あと最近ではお屋敷の中で深夜に不思議な足音をよく聞くと私たちは肖像画の中のベアトリーチェ様が姿を消してお屋敷の中を散歩しているんだろうと囁き合ってるんですよ。ずいぶん前ですが、私もそうかもしれない足音を夜の見回りの時に聞いたことがあります。
That's right. She definitely said that. Exactly the same thing I had been told just now.
でも、怯えることはないんですよ。ベアトリーチェ様は親方様とは異なるもう一人のお屋敷の主です。だから変に怯えたりしないで敬意を持っていれば決して悪いことはしないのだそうです。
ただし敬意を持たないと恐ろしいんだったね。
はい。私が勤めを始める直前に階段を転がり落ちて腰に大怪我をして辞めた方はベアトリーチェ様のことを悪く言っていたそうです。だから使用人たちはベアトリーチェ様のお怒りに触れたのだろうと噂し合ったそうです。
敬わないとお怒りに触れて怪我をする。つまり使用人たちにとってベアトリーお稲荷さんにいたずらしたらお狐様のたたりがあるってくらいには信憑性があるわけだ。
Right, Inari, by the way, is a fox god in Japan. He's got, I believe he's the main subject of Silent Hill F. It's been a while. We played that game literally like 7 months ago, and I completely pushed it out of my mind because of how horrible it was. But, yeah, he's the, like, if you look up Inari Shrine, actually, we can show it off real quick. So Inari Shrine, it's the one that's got like hundreds of different torii gates. Yeah, like this. Here, one sec. It's got like hundreds of torii gates back to back to back to back to back. Like this. Let's see if we can find a picture of Inari-sama itself. Here. Yeah, here it is. Oh my god. There's so many of them. There's like a ton of little foxes, for Inari-sama. But one sec. Here, this is a good one. It's just a statue of him. Get it up on screen. But he looks like this. It's just a fox statue. But this is the fox god that I'm talking about. And that's who they're talking about. Anyway. And of course, a kitsune is like a Japanese fox yokai. Or, you know, spirit. Of course, even though everyone accepts that curses and the like don't exist in the modern era, people are still afraid and still have a little respect for them. You often see it when, in a residential area, someone is building a house, and they call a Shinto priest for a ceremony to honor the god of that plot of land. Oh. Oh wow, just like in Shin Megami, just like in Silent Hill F. But we saw a lot of this in SHF, where, the main, God, what the fuck was her name? I've pushed all these characters out of my fucking head. But the Igarashi family, where the Igarashi family have, you know, a shrine, and if you want to build something in that area or in that village, you have to call them, and then kind of quote-unquote purify the land to prevent an evil snake spirit from rising up from the ground and like, you know, getting out and hurting the land and cursing people and shit. That's kind of what they're referring to here as well. So it's crazy that we're seeing this being, or this here, when we experienced it in Silent Hill F. So if I would have read Umineko before playing Silent Hill F, I would have been like, oh my god, they're referencing Umineko. You might think that was just a big waste of time and money, but it is said that if the workers don't do that, a big accident will occur, so they never neglected to do it. You also hear about how if an Inari shrine is carelessly removed during a town replanning, there'd be a curse by Kitsune-sama. I think I might have read somewhere that when the occupying forces were trying to expand an airport, they tried to remove an Inari-san that was in the way. And when the workers kept getting struck down by mysterious fevers. Even in modern cities like Tokyo, it wasn't rare to see modern buildings packed all around an old Inari shrine, leaving the shrine itself untouched. And this wasn't limited to Japan. It's probably similar to how foreigners baptize babies. If I remember right, by Christian doctrine, if unbaptized souls have even the slightest amount of sin, they will still go to hell. Putting water on a child's forehead doesn't do anything but make them cry. But if by doing just that, parents can prevent their children from going to hell, they will happily go through with that ceremony. Yeah, I won't go too much into that, but just know that depending on what sect of that religion, whether it's Catholicism or Christianity or whatever, it's usually Catholics who baptize. At least in Catholicism, technically, if you don't baptize your child, they end up in quote unquote hell, right? Like they'll go to hell if a baby dies. If you're holding a baby, you trip, you fall down the stairs, baby dies, he wasn't baptized, your baby goes to hell. According to like the Catholic doctrine. If you are pregnant with a child and the baby dies, they also end up there. There's like a specific section in all of the circles of hell, and one of them is specifically for unborn and unbaptized children, which is really fucked up to think about. But anyway, in short, even in this modern society of reason, we were still unable to throw away every trace of belief and fear. You could even say that we accept certain sorts of supernatural things, though in a passive way. Maybe the only difference on this island is that Beatrice is the object of that worship.
じゃあ、つまり、この島で、とても人間技とは思えない何かが起これば、それはベアトリーチェの仕業だ。となるわけか。シャノンちゃんも言ってた気がするな。ちゃんと閉めたはずの窓や扉や鍵が、もう一度見回りに来たら開いていたとか。消したはずの明かりがついていたり、つけたはずの明かりが消えていたりとか。んで、確かジェシカは、朝出かけようとしたら、カバンが見つからないのもベアトリーチェの仕業だってふざけてたんだよな。
Now, thinking about what he just said, like specifically this. Hold on. There. This. It makes you wonder why Beatrice would do this. Like, besides fucking with the people that, you know, are in the room, why would she just leave a light on? Why would she unlock windows or unlock doors? You know? Like, unless she's walking through the mansion, she's like, oh man, it looks so nice out. She opens the window, just leans out, and is just like, you know, enjoying the breeze, and it just is like, alright, well, whatever. And just walks away. It's like a servant will get to it. You know, it makes you wonder, like, what's the purpose of her, just doing this? Can you imagine you're like, you're a servant, you're working, in this mansion. You go to a room, you're about to clean it, you turn the light on, you walk inside, you start dusting, and then the lights go out. And then they come back on like 5 minutes later. And you're just like, Beatrice, why are you doing this to me? And she's just standing by the door, like she just flicks the lights off, watching your reaction. Like, I guess that's why she would do it, but whatever.
よく覚えてるな。普通なら妖精さんが隠したとでも言うところが、この島ではベアトリーチェがになるってだけの話だぜ。ま、 そんなくったらない話さ。
You're doubting
このお屋
Beatrice.
敷も築30年くらいになるそうだからね。それだけになれば多少の怪談やオカルトは生まれてくるものだよ。学校の七不思議なんかのようにね。
そこで、チェス盤をひっくり返すぜ。
え？
つまり、この島では、人間にはできないことは、ベアトリーチェの仕業と置き換えることができるルールがあるってわけだ。人間にはできないこと。人間は何人だ？ 18 人だ。つまり犯人は、この島のルールにのっとって、この事件は魔女の仕業だとアピールしてることになる。つまりそれは、19人目の仕業ですよと訴えたくて仕方がないわけだ。気に入らねえぜ。全然気に入らねえ。
気に入らないって何がだよ。
I mean, they killed his parents.
仮に、不可視の19人目が存在して、そいつが自分の存在をアピールしたいなら、俺ならもっと完璧なタイミングでやるぜ。
完璧なタイミングでってのはどういう意味だい？
ああ。だって、事件は深夜から未明にかけて起こったのは、深夜まで話し合いをしてたり、夜勤をしてたり、あるいは部屋に帰って寝ていたり。どいつもこいつもアリバイがあやふやで、十分内部犯行が疑える段階だ。ジョージの兄貴も、エヴァおばさんに聞かされてるんだろ？内部犯行の可能性が高いって話。
うん。まあね。
つまり、不可視の19人目が実在したなら、最初の事件は自分のアピールに失敗してるんだ。いや、そもそも時間帯がミステイクだ。不可視の19人目をアピールするためには、死んだ6人以外の12人が、全員白であることが確定している状況下で行われなければならない。
Okay, looks like it cut off the audio, but they had to make sure that the crime took place under conditions, which proved that the remaining 12 people were all innocent.
疑わしい人間がゼロにならなきゃ、自分の存在をアピールできないんだよ。だから、全員のアリバイが一番あやふやになる深夜の時間帯は、19人目にとって、自分が一番あやふやになる時間帯でもある。にもかかわらず、その時間を選んで犯行に及んだ。
そんな時間に犯行を起こせば、18人の誰かが疑われるのは明白。にもかかわらず、マリアに手紙を渡して魔女を名乗り、誰もが自分でないと否定している。
つまりベアトリーチェという19人目がいるように見せかけたい人間が18人の中にいると、こう言いたいのかよ。なんだかぶっ飛んだ発想だな。まだおふくろの屋敷の外に不審者が潜んでいるって話の方が信憑性があるってもんだぜ。まさかバトラはこの客間の中に犯人がいると疑っているのかよ。
ああ。何者かが、俺たちにベアトリーチェが存在すると。そうさ。昨べのあの手紙から、もう事件は始まっていたんだ。証拠も根拠も何もねえけどな。チェス盤を逆さにした限りじゃ、俺の見立てはこんなところだ。
飛びまくってるにも程があるぜ。妙な推理小説の読みすぎじゃねえのかよ。
You've been reading too much Detective Conan.
でも、無視できない着眼点もあるね。
Actually, I think that came out in the 90s.
19人目がいるかいないかは別にしても、その犯人は確実にこの島のルールにのっとって何かを仕掛けてきている。僕はね、今バトラ君の話を聞いていて、少しだけ気持ち悪いことを思い出してたんだよ。
Yeah, Case Closed came out in 1994. Never mind.
気持ち悪いことって？
覚えてるかい？ベアトリーチェの手紙。ベアトリーチェは利子の回収を行うと言っていたね。そして利子とは後宮家のすべてだと言った。
Jessica and I thought back on what Maria had read aloud the previous night.
言ってたぜ。確かに言ってた。そして利子の回収をこれから行うが、黄金の謎を解いたらその権利を失うとも言ってたよな。
おじいさまは黄金を授かり、後宮家を再興した。つまり黄金を資本に生み出したものすべてが利子だってベアトリーチェは言っている。つまり
People as well.
冗談きついぜ、兄貴。まさか後宮家のすべて、つまりじいさまが生み出したものすべてってことは、じいさまから血を分けた一族のことを指すってのかよ。
あの手紙をそう読み解いたなら、この殺人はベアトリーチェが行った正当な利子の回収ということになる。となればこの事件はまだ続くよ。利子の回収はまだ途中なんだからね。
George turned around, looking over the parlor. There were still many people who held the name Ushiromiya, and because Golda and Shannon had been killed, we knew that not even the servants were safe, despite lacking the Ushiromiya name.
私たち全員を殺すつもりかよ。でもおかしいよ、ジョージ兄さん。ならどうして6人だけ？他に大勢殺せたはず。下手をすれば寝込みを襲って全員を一晩で殺すことも可能だったはず。
At worst, it should have been possible for them to assault everyone while they were sleeping, kill them in a single night.
どうしてそれをしなかったの？
So again, I don't know why they're still doing this. Because remember, like, if you were in this position as well, excluding all the dramatic irony, that being stuff that we know that they don't know, that causes tension. For example, you as the player, you as the reader, or in your case, you as the listener, as you're going through the story, you're questioning whether or not Beatrice is real. You might think, oh, there's no way she's real. But then you have that scene where Shannon is patrolling the, the hallway, and she saw what looked to be a flicker of golden butterflies, right? And you're like, huh, well, maybe Beatrice is real. And then the murders happen, and then we're having these discussions. But the main thing that we're supposed to remember is that all of them, excluding all of those little scenes that we've had that they don't have access to, or that they didn't have the ability to witness, they all have access to this fucking letter. And the epitaph. The epitaph that's been, under their noses this entire time. And I'm still wondering why the fuck they haven't come to this conclusion of, like, on the first Twilight, offer the 6 chosen by the key as sacrifices. Why did 6 people die? Because according to the epitaph, 6 are supposed to die. That's what's still confusing me as to why they haven't reached this conclusion. Either they're all a little slow about this, or something else is going on. I assume it's still just Ryukishi trying to build up tension. But by this point, this is like the 4th or 5th time they've mentioned this. And by them, I mean like this group of characters, like Jessica, George, and Battler. I mean, like, why did they choose 6? Why did 6 people die? Why would Beatrice choose 6 people to die? Why them 6 specifically? How come it seems like someone else is supposed to be chosen, but instead it was Shannon. Why those 6? And it's kind of, a little weird. Anyway.
特別条項だよ。黄金の謎を暴く者が現れたら、利子の権利は失
Oh,
わ
well,
れ
here
る。
we go. Now George is finally fucking, railroading us a little bit. Or them specifically.
そして手紙の最後にはこう結ばれていたはずだよ。おじいさまの黄金の謎をみんなで解いてみろとね。
This happens every fucking time. I'll go on a small rant about something and then they'll just explain it.
ジーザスようやく犯人のメッセージが分かってきたじゃねえか。
What is this, Jojo? Oh my god!
つまり犯人は俺たちにじい様のあの碑文の謎を解いてみやがると言ってるわけだ。しかもぼやぼやしてればどんどん利子の回収を進めちまうつもりだ。
I realize this is all based on several guesses that are... I realize this is all based on several guesses that are way out there. But not everything that happens in this world fits together in a perfect line. Most of the events we don't understand are only individual points. By fitting them into a straight line, we're beginning to understand. When the points at either end of the line are really close, the line itself is more logical and easier to understand. And when those points are really far away, the opposite is true. It's the distance between these points that makes us say our guesses are way out there. However, if the distances we span are too narrow, that means our thinking will be narrow too. Is there a difference between making guesses and reasoning? Am I just using easily made guesses to try and force this crime into a pattern that I can understand? No, that's not it. When you're lost in the dark and searching around with your hands, what you're doing is relying on your imagination and making guesses. Only imagination can find the points that need to be tied together. Reasoning is nothing more than the act of drawing lines between them. If you can't imagine, you can't reason. What I'm doing now might be way out there, but I'm sure it isn't a mistake either. Only the power of imagination can pull clues out from the darkness. And then I can use the power of reasoning to tie those clues together. It was a lot like the process of searching out an enemy's weak spot and striking. It's okay if I'm way out there. Find a weak point first. Then we can think about how to strike. Right now is the time to find points we can tie together later. For the time being, I put aside whether a 19th person existed, and announced our theory that the goal of the culprit might have been to make us solve the riddle of the epitaph. Uncle Hideyoshi seemed to be extremely interested, but Aunt Natsuhi said it was ridiculous and dismissed it.
確かにそう考えるとあの怪しい手紙も納得がいくっていうもんや。その動機はなかなかええ線をいっとると思うで。マリアちゃんに手紙を渡したのが誰かはさておきな。
Actually, here, give me 1 second.
そう考えるとあの怪しい手紙も納得がいくっていうもんや。
Okay, that didn't help much, but it's okay.
その動機はなかなかええ線をいっとると思うで。マリアちゃんに手紙を渡したのが誰かはさておきな。
おお、ベアトリーチェはいる。
Even though she was puffing up her cheeks in a cute way she'd been doing since yesterday, I couldn't think of it as cute. If I poked fun at her, it might suddenly transform into a creepy laugh.
隠し黄金など存在しません。ですが、その存在を妄信する犯人が、お父さん、それを私たちに解かせて、横領を企んでいるという動機は、なるほどと頷けるものがあります。しかし、ならばなぜ、後宮家の主要な人物ばかりを最初に殺したのです？
道理ですな。謎を解かせるなら、金蔵さんに近しい人物を先に殺すことは得策ではないはずです。
そうね。それにその論法で行くんだったら最初にお父様を脅迫した方が早くない？私たちに謎を解かせるよりも本人に答えを聞いた方が早いはずよ。
Now, before I forget this, There is one other quick thing that I thought about some time ago that I just kind of forgot to bring up. Now, if we look at our characters, of the ones that are missing, we have Shannon, Golda, Rosa, Rudolph, Kirie, and Klaus. If you look at them closely, Klaus is missing part of his face, Rudolph is missing his face, same with Kirie, same with Rosa, Shannon is missing the other side of her face, and Golda is missing the front part of it. If we think about this death roulette, there's of course the two current theories. Does Beatrice exist? And if not, does a 19th person exist? And if not, is someone trying to make us think that a 19th person exists? Now think about it this way. We do have one character that is interested in not only gaining Kinzo's favor, but also wants her family to succeed, and she wants to prove herself. That person being Natsuhi. Now, I'm not trying to imply anything yet, I'm not trying to make any specific accusations yet. But it could be that maybe Natsuhi is the killer. We've gotten a few clues about this that point towards her. It could... I'm just throwing this out there as a possibility. Natsuhi isn't really liked by her family, right? So she's probably trying to solve the riddle, specifically to get the quote-unquote gold, or get on her father's, or well, on Kinzo's good side. And maybe by doing that, he will repay her and, their family will be out of debt. Now, we do know that technically she is very loyal to Klaus, but what if the second personality thing that we're seeing with Maria is also a thing that happens with Natsuhi? Maybe when she gets her headaches, or when they're too strong, she gets a second personality of sorts. I know I'm sounding like an imbecile by mentioning this, but what I think could have happened, because she had been exposed to this, to the rifle that she has now. She knows where it was. She's seen it before. For all we know, when Eva and Hideyoshi, when both of them left, she got up from her nap, went into that room where all 5 of these people were, or at least all 4 of them were, and shot them in the face. Point blank almost. And then it just so happens that Golda and, Shannon happened to catch her, so she also killed them. She was probably going to kill someone else, but they probably showed up and, she took care of them. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because there was a sort of clawing at her door. What if it wasn't a clawing of sorts? What if she just literally didn't have her key or something to her room and had to somehow fish for it? Like maybe she thought the door was open, so her hands are bloody, so she's outside her door trying to claw at it. And because we read that she had her scorpion charm on the door, we're made to think, oh, what if Beatrice just didn't come for her? What if Shannon was the one who, quote-unquote, clawed at her door, trying to get in, before remembering, oh yeah, I have a key, and then just turned the key. And then went inside her room, washed her hands or something, washed the key maybe, and then locked herself in the room again and went back to sleep. This could be a possibility. It could be that she's trying to make it so that Beatrice is seen as real. It could be that she is being possessed by Beatrice to perform the killings. Or it could all just be a red herring. But that's something to keep in mind. Just keep that in the back of your head.
確かにその通りや。もっともお父さんが並大抵の脅迫で口を割るとは思えんが。
金蔵さんをよく知る方なら、金蔵さんが並大抵の脅しには屈しないことをよく存じているでしょう。
これだけの財産を持つ後宮家を背負われる方です。今日まで様々な攻撃や脅迫にさらされてきました。それら全てに打ち勝ってきたからこそ今日の繁栄があるのです。
それに関しては私も同感だぜ。うちのじいさまが脅されて何かに従うなんてちょっと想像もつかないぜ。
ジェシカ、言葉遣いがはしたないです。
Stop talking like a man. What are you doing?
はい。
ならこういう発想はどうだろう。いや、これもぶっ飛んでるか。
I couldn't hesitate. Out there ideas are like bows and arrows. It might be hard to hit with, but it's a great weapon, because you can hit enemies far away. Or what if they're like rifles and bullets? Or shotguns and bullets? Something that that a lot of people don't know, or at least in modern day they don't know, is that shotguns have a really long range. The only reason I'm bringing this up is, what if instead of a rifle they really did use another gun, like a shotgun? But the reason why I'm bringing it up is because when you're hunting fowl, like birds, there are hunting shotguns with shells specifically made for hunting birds. I don't remember the type of shot that it is, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And you shoot birds from pretty far away. Here, actually, let's find out real quick. Well, they're called birdshot. Okay, so the range for this is, let's see. Yeah, the range for this is about 45 yards. So that's like 40 meters just about. So it's a pretty long fucking distance. It's really far away. And that's the range of a single like bird shot. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because in video games, shotguns are close range weapons, right? The closer you are to an enemy, the more damage you do. That's not how they work IRL, but you know, that's like video games have kind of fucked with that a lot, with that preconception of like shotguns or the perspective of shotgun range. But IRL, they have pretty long range. So assuming a shotgun was involved, that could also be why parts of their faces are missing. Because remember, like, Grandpa was like to scare birds with his rifle, but maybe he also watched some fucking Clint Eastwood film and just was like, hell yeah, I really like cowboys. Actually, hold on. Did any of those exist in '86? I'm pretty sure some of them did, right? If I quickly go through them. Yeah, from the 50s all the way on. So so he's been doing stuff since the 50s. So yeah, it could have been a Clint Eastwood like shotgun that he used at some point, maybe. But anyway, they say most people who've died in battles were killed by arrow wounds. In battle, you can't just shoot off one arrow. You shoot a whole bunch of arrows at once, pushing forwards towards the enemy troops with a wall of them. So keep shooting over and over. Create a wall as you push forward towards the truth.
犯人が隠された黄金が狙いってんなら 俺たちに解かせるのは効率が悪い。謎を作った本人に答えを聞く方が手っ取り早いさ。じゃあさ、これはつまり全てじい様に当てたメッセージってことじゃないのか。
In other words, these murders were a threat made against grandfather. If he didn't tell the culprit, where the gold was, his family members would be killed off one by one. What if we were the only ones being forced to solve this riddle? I mean, it could be that. Or, again, it could be someone... It's not a threat, but it's like someone playing along with Kinzo. Such as, say, for example, Natsuhi. Not saying she really did it, but that's like a floating theory, right? What if grandfather was too? If you think about it that way, it explains grandfather's mysterious disappearance. If the culprit already attacked grandfather, then judging by the state of the six corpses were left in, he should have been left on display somewhere with that horrible makeup added. Battler's still in the denial phase. He went through all the stages of grief, and then he went back to denial. But despite that, we still haven't found him. So does that mean grandfather has been kidnapped and is being held somewhere?
そんな、まさかそんな。
面白い話じゃない？つまりお父様はどこかに監禁されていて、黄金のありかを話さないと次々に殺人を繰り返すぞと脅されているわ。
その話のどこが面白いのか理解に苦しみます。
See, I wouldn't say it's like grandfather's being confined somewhere and the culprit saying will be killed off one by one if he doesn't tell them where the gold is. I don't think it's like a hostage situation here. I think it's more like an IRS situation. And you haven't paid your taxes in 60 years. And they're gonna get your money one way or another. It's time to pay up. You've had 2 generations. 3 technically. To get this shit going and you haven't paid back your taxes. So cough him up. Aunt Natsuhi glared at her, but Aunt Ava just smiled calmly.
この時間になっても姿を現さない以上、おじい様が事件に巻き込まれているのはほぼ間違いないと思います。それを思えばバトラ君の仮説も無視することはできないんじゃないですか。
ジョージは黙ってなさい。そもそもお父様っていついなくなったのかしら。
最後にお父さんの姿を見たのは誰や？
何女？
多分私でしょう。
Oh, yeah.
今朝主人たちの姿が見えないと騒ぎになった時、お父様の書斎にいるかもしれないという話になり、私がお部屋にお伺いしてそこでご挨拶をしました。そういえば書斎の鍵をずっと借りっぱなしですね。源氏、これは返しておきます。
Natsuhi pulled out the gold key. Is that the reason why they never told us what the key looked like before? Kinzo? Kin? Having a kin key? A gold key? I forgot what the fucking Japanese word for key was. It was something stupid. That was very short, but with a very complicated kanji. She pulled out a gold key. He had the key to his fucking room is gold. Looking at the key, Aunt Ava giggled.
ねえ源氏さん、どうせ警察はお父様の部屋も徹底的に捜査すると思うわ。何を隠していてもどうせ暴かれちゃう。
Yeah, that's the one. That kanji looks so fucking complicated. But yeah, it's Kagi. Yeah, King Kagi. Or Kagi Kin. No, I think it would be King Kagi. Like gold key. But anyway. It's just like crab. Anyway.
だったらちょっと早く今この場で話してくれてもいいんじゃないかしら。
何のお話でしょうか。
シンプルな話よ。お父様の書斎はその鍵がなければ外から入ることはできない密室よ。その定義の確認をしたいの。 お父様の部屋には入り口が一つある。あとは窓？他に出入り口は？
ありません。中に入るには入り口しかありません。
間違いなくね。秘密の隠し扉なんかがあったりはしないのね。お父様が不在である以上、後宮家の最高序列者は私よ。その後宮家の当主代行として聞いているの。それを理解した上で答えなさい。あの部屋には入り口以外に他に出入り口は？お父様の最高の側近だったあなたは知っているはずよ。
And Natsuhi looked a little offended at the part about the highest ranked family member. She turns to Jessica. It's like, technically my daughter is, but she kept her mouth closed for the time being and waited for Genji's answer. I couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable. Why was she going on and on about hidden doors?
カノン君も熊沢さんも知ってるなら教えてくれない？あるならあるって言ってくれた方がいいの。じゃないと今からある人がとても追い詰められることになるわよ。隠し扉があると仮定されたら私の話は全て水の泡。
Aunt Ava didn't specify which person was about to be driven into a corner, but following the flow of the conversation, I had a feeling she was referring to Aunt Natsuhi.
母さん、何の話？
ジョージは少し黙ってなさい。どうなの？源氏さん、カノン君。そして熊沢さん、隠し扉はあるの？ないの？源氏さんはお父様が書斎を改造した時、施工業者の監督をしていたはず。知らないとは言わせないわよ。
そのようなものは親方様の書斎にはありません。
間違いなく片翼の場所を許されたカノン君。
はい、間違いなく親方様の書斎に隠し扉などありません。
熊沢さんは？
いえ、私も聞いたことがありませんよ。
お父様と親交の深い南條先生は？
私もそんなものは聞いたことがありませんな。
結構。じゃあいい？話を始めるわよ。
Alright.
とってもシンプルな話なの。
So this is probably when we address a theory that you as the player should have already been kind of thinking of. Such as the theory that I proposed a bit ago about Natsuhi. Everyone tilted their head doubtfully, wondering what Aunt Ava was talking about. Was starting to talk about so proudly. Aunt Ava laughed triumphantly, as though she were about to reveal a secret only she knew.
お父様を最後に目撃したのは夏日姉さんよね。詳しい時間は忘れちゃったけど、今朝の9時前くらいのことだと思ったわ。姉さん、覚えてる？私、あなたがお父様の書斎からちょうど出てくるところに出くわしたわよね。
Here comes the fucking Halloween music again.
ええ、覚えています。それが何だというのですか？
そして、次に姉さんがお父様の書斎を訪れたのは、兄さんたちの遺体が見つかってからよね。それを報告しに書斎に上がり、そこで私と一緒に不在を確認したわ。ところで姉さん、その時お父様の書斎に入ろうとして気づいたことはなかったかしら？
気づいたこと？何のことですか？
ほら、ゴミを拾ったでしょ。 畳んだレシートを。
確かにそんなゴミを拾った気がします。それが何か？
そのレシートは私が飛行場に着く前に寄った売店で飴玉を買った時にもらったものよ。
Aunt Ava pulled out a small bag of candy out of her handbag.
ああ、あの時に買った飴のレシート。でも母さん、そのレシートの話が何と関係あるの？
ジョージ、もうちょい黙って聞いとってや。
Uncle Hideyoshi's expression was a little strict. Apparently he understood what Aunt Ava was getting at.
本当にこれは気まぐれよ。何かを予見してたとか、ましてや夏日姉さんを罠にかけようとか、そんなのじゃ。実はね、そのレシート、姉さんがお父様と最後に会って出てきて、そこで私と会ったでしょ。その時書斎の扉に私が挟み込んだものなのよ。
I knew it.
ってことはどういうことですか？
The rain and thunder picked up.
つまり夏日おばさんがそのレシートを拾うまで誰もドアを開けてい
ちょっと待ってよ、エヴァおばさん。レシート挟むなんてバレバレだって。じいさまが外出した時に気づいて面白がってもう一回挟み直した可能性も。
Jessica hurriedly argued back. She still really didn't know what all this meant. But she realized that whatever it was, it would raise suspicions about her own mother.
もちろんバレないようにレシートは小さく折りたたんだわ。でもね、レシートが落ちるところを仮に見たとしても、扉のどこの高さの部分に挟み込んであったかは正確には分かんないんじゃない？私は夏日姉さんが鍵を取り出している間に確認したわ。レシートが挟み込まれた位置は寸分の1ミリの違いもなく私が挟んだ場所だった。
なぜそんな子供じみたいたずらをされるのか理解できません。大方、私の部屋の扉にいたずらをしたのもあなたでしょう。
夏日さんの部屋の扉？
The music is gonna stop. We're gonna cut to a black screen. And then we're gonna hear hee 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 hee. And then we're gonna have another CG of Maria looking weird. And then it's gonna be her saying something like, "It was Beatrice who moved the receipt. Hee 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 hee, but you're all too stupid to see it."
不愉快な話だったので話しませんでしたが、今朝目が覚めたら扉の外側にあのシャッターの落書きと同じと思われる赤い塗料でいたずらがされていたのです。かきむしったような気持ちの悪い跡で。
なんやその話。なんで今まで黙っとったんや。
申し訳ありません。あの後立て続けにいろいろと恐ろしいことが起こったため、今の今まで失明していました。
知らないわよ、そんなの。私がしてるのは姉さんの部屋じゃなくてお父様の部屋の扉の話よ。姉さんがお父様がいるのを確認してから私と一緒に不在を確認するまでの間、扉を使わずどうやって
そんなことは知りません。私が知りたいくらいです。
夏日姉さんの他にお父さんの在室を確認したのは誰や。
Genji, I think?
ゆうべ金蔵さんとチェスをしたのが
Or Kinzo,
会っ
yeah.
た最後ですな。
But Genji was also there.
夕食の直前までご一緒だったはずです。
それより後の時間は誰かおらんのか。
私です。
There we go.
昨夜の晩餐のお世話をしております。
はい、僕とシャノンも一緒でした。
ここまでは間違いなくお父さんも部屋にいたやろな。だがな、夏日姉さん、不在だった書斎は窓も扉も全て閉め切られた状態だったそうやないか。なのに夏日さんは今朝お父さんに会って話をした言うと。
私には皆さんが何を険悪になっているのか分かりません。どなたか説明してくださいますかな。
父さんと母さんは夏日おばさんが今朝おじいさまに会ったというのは嘘だと言っているのかい？
嘘なんかつくもんかよ。母さんは潔白だぜ。
そうだ。
なんで嘘なんかつくんだよ。
ジェシカ、言葉遣いを直しなさいといつも言っています。
All at once, the whole room was in an uproar. Aunt Ava and Aunt Natsuhi confronted each other across the parlor table, with George confronting Jessica. What the heck's going on?
複数の人間の目撃があるのは昨晩までよ。でも今朝以降、お父様の姿を見たと称するのは夏日姉さんただ一人。そして私の挟んだレシートが物語る奇妙な事実。さあ、この点と点はどうやれば結べるのかしら。
Aunt Ava urged everyone to imagine it. Sure, that receipt could become an important point, but I didn't know which other points to tie it to or how. If we try searching for the answer, Aunt Ava probably once will find that Aunt Natsuhi lied and acted as though grandfather was in the room this morning. Has that fact been exposed by a whim of Aunt Ava's?
わけわかんねえぜ。なんで母さんが嘘をつかなきゃならないんだよ。その理由がねえじゃねえかよ。
その理由は私も知りたいわよ。でもね、ジェシカちゃん、お父様の材質を偽る価値が全くないとは限らないのよ。推理小説でもたまに出てくるでしょ。生存時刻を偽ることによって自分のアリバイを偽証するトリックよ。
なんだそりゃ。そんなの聞いたことないぜ。
お父様はまだ見つからないけれど、普通に考えればもう殺されていると考えるのが自然でしょうね。
You've never read Sherlock Holmes or The Case of the Filch Falcon or something? What are they teaching you at school?
となれば必ず近いうちに死体は見つかる。その時死亡時刻をうまく偽ることができれば、夏日姉さんはアリバイを作ることができるのよ。わかる？みんな。
This morning, when Natsuhi confirmed that grandfather was there, she lied. And he was already dead at that time? And then she moved the body to some other location and tampered with it so that when we find it, we'll think he was killed just a second ago? That make it possible for her to create an alibi even just by staying with the rest of us. Then she could say, I heard someone screaming, dash over there and become the first to find the body along with everyone else. Is that what Aunt Ava is saying?
バカバカしい。推理小説など所詮は娯楽小説。そんなものばかり読んでいるからそのような不謹慎な発想に至るのです。
そうだぜ。死亡時刻を少しくらいごまかしたって、そんなの警察が検視すりゃ一発でバレるじゃねえかよ。古典の世界だったらともかく、現代日本でそんなトリック本気で通用すると思ってんのかよ。おかしいぜ。
Well, that is true. This would probably work in the early 1900s, in the 1800s, but not in the 80s for the most part.
そうかしら。今朝南條先生が亡くなった人たちの死体を見て死亡時刻を曖昧に見積もられたわよ。検視結果は環境や個体差に非常に左右されやすい、数時間単位で誤差の出る非常にアバウトなものなのよ。しかも困ったことに警察の科学的な捜査は明日にならないとできない。そこまでの正確な死亡時刻を測ることなんて ジェシカちゃんの言う現代日本でもそうそう簡単なことじゃないのよ。ねえ、南條先生。
No, the opposite is true, as a matter of fact. Even in the 80s, I'm pretty sure you could predict the time of death to a very close, like, minute of it happening. Even nowadays, like, especially nowadays, you can definitely tell when and how someone was murdered by examining their corpse. Like, she's basically saying, her argument is, well, our doctor couldn't figure it out, and doctors are supposed to know about this shit. Like, yeah, sure, like, they might know about human biology, but, like, imagine finding the corpse of a person in front of you, right? You walk into your home, and someone is dead right in front of you, and you just so happen to have come back home with your friend who's a pediatrician, and you turn to them and you're like, how did they die, and how long ago? Your friend's just gonna turn to you and be like, dude, I'm a fucking pediatrician, I don't know this shit. And you're like, but you're a doctor. Shouldn't you know? Can't you check? Like, no, they're a fucking pediatrician. I'm not saying Nanjo is one, but Nanjo is probably just a generic, like, a general practitioner. Or if he specializes in something, it's definitely not, like, you know, when corpses die specifically.
検視は経験と勘の必要な非常に難しい作業です。誤診率も非常に高いと聞いております。確かにほんの数時間程度の誤差を出してしまうことは大いにあり得るでしょうな。
しかしアリバイの世界は数時間もあれば十分やで。古典の十分に通用するトリックなんや。夏日姉さん、わしらあんたを疑いたいわけやないんやで。疑いとうないから潔白を示してほしいだけなんや。
何の潔白を示せというのですか？
She has the gun. Oh no.
今朝私は確かにお父様にお会いしました。そして心の中に片翼のわしを刻めとお言葉をいただいて、あのお言葉をも否定するというのですか？それだけは断じて許せません。お父様がかけられた言葉までも否定することは断じて許せません。
あるいはお父様の遺体は出てこないのかしら？普通失踪は死亡宣告に7年かかるもの。余命残りわずかなお父様を7年も延命し、その財産を独占するにはなんともうまいやり方じゃない。
聞き捨てなりません。
Oh my god. I did not kill father. Points gun at you. You might as well be a pediatrician. True. Oh boy.
それ以上は聞き捨てがなりません。私は後ろ宮夏日、この身に片翼のわしをまとう資格はなくとも胸の中にしかと刻まれています。当主跡継ぎのクラウスの妻としてその責務を代行する私に向かって何たる暴言。
何？
A counter picture. Oh boy.
その銃で私を撃つの？いいわよ。撃っちゃえば？どうせ言い逃れも思いつかなくて苦し紛れなんでしょ？やりなさいよ。暴力で真実をごまかしてごらんなさいよ。
It's interesting that they're using red and blue as a contrast here. I won't go too much into this, but in Japan, red and blue aren't seen as opposite colors like they are in the West. For example, like fire and water. In Japan, the colors that are seen as opposites are actually red and green. So it's interesting that they went with a blue here for Natsuhi's background. Also, the way the images are cut are not correct. As in the red overlaps a little bit more than the blue, but that's whatever. Oh my god. She looks diabolical. It wasn't like Natsuhi had been actually holding that gun at the ready and threatening anyone. But as she was egged on by Aunt Ava, she did hold it at the ready. Unsurprisingly, once things got to this stage, Jessica and Genji tried to stop her.
奥様、どうかお気をお静めください。
She's just literally holding it up. That's so fucking funny.
母さんは嘘なんかついてない。ならこんなの聞き捨てなきゃ。
落ち着いてえな、夏日姉さん。確かにお父さんは部屋にいたと誓ってくれればいいんやで。それだけなのに、なんでそんなに取り乱しとるんや。
I mean, if you were getting accused of murder and patricide, I mean, you'd kind of be in the same position.
それもそうです。夏日さんは嘘をついていない。それだけのことじゃありませんか。
She's not lying.
だから説明してほしいのよ。お父様がどうやって部屋からいなくなったのか。窓は内側からしっかり閉じられていた。扉も同じよ。
I was actually about to mention this because I can't in the back of my mind I was like, are they forgetting that he's got a window in his that he's got probably many windows in his room? We know that he opened it and that he threw his ring out the window as the storm started. So for all we know, he climbed out, or he really does have a secret passage, and you know, none of the other servants know about it. But
今朝夏日姉さんが間違いなくお父様に会ったというなら、夏日姉さんには開かぬ扉の密室からいかにしてお父様が部屋からいなくなったかを説明してもらわなくちゃ。じゃないと姉さんが嘘つきってことにやっぱりあなたという人、どこまで私を愚弄すれば。反論したいならぜひしなさいな。そうね、今すぐこの場で釈明をしてみなさい。そうしたらあなたを疑ったことを謝ってあげてもいいわ。あの書斎の密室からお父様はいかにして抜け出したのか。そんなこと説明もできませんし不要です。そうなら私が説明してあげるわよ。私の立場も姉さんの立場もいいとこ取りのとても仲良しな説明なんだから。姉さんの言う今朝の時点でお父様が在室していたことを信じてあげるわよ。でも次に扉が開かれた時にお父様はいなかった。ここまでは依存ないわよね。あなたの言うことにこれ以上耳を傾ける気はありません。その軽薄な口を慎みなさい。私の推理はこうよ。
we're now going to discuss Schrodinger's Kinzel, or in this case, Natsuhi's Kinzel.
扉から姉さんしか出入りしていないことは私が2回確認している。そしてレシートもそれを立証している。にもかかわらずお父様を部屋から出すパズルの答えは窓よ。 したのよ。夏日姉さんはお父様を3階の書斎の窓から中庭に突き落としたのよ。
踊れ。
奥様、こらえてください。
エヴァ様、どうかおやめくださいませ。
その後、中庭に転落して死んだお父様の遺体は、夏日姉さんが屋敷内の戸締まりを確認すると言って出て行った時にどこかへ隠したのよ。多分その時に死亡時刻を偽る工作もしたんでしょうね。
クラウス兄さんたちの事件も、さらに昨べのベアトリーチェの事件もひっくるめて、ナスシさんが怪しい可能性が非常に高いっちゅうことだ。本当ならこんなことを言いたくはない。だがもうぶちまけてしまったからには仕方がない。頼むわ、夏希姉さん。どうか自分の無実を説明してくれんか。侍とわしはあんたを疑わなきゃならんのや。
Didn't she have two people with her? She was with Genji and Nanjo. Sorry, and she was with Genji and Kano. I believe they said they were all gonna go around like checking all the windows and shit. I assume they were all walking together in a group. That'd be like the alibi, right?
なぜこの私が後ろ宮夏日がこのような恥ずかしめを。
Looks like we've got everyone's views on the record now. Oh, we didn't get Maria laughing.
ダメだな。全然ダメだぜ。エヴァおばさん。
ダメって何がだよ、バトラ。
Jessica looked up at me, hanging on to my every word, as Aunt Ava's expression was confident as ever.
全然ダメって何が？バトラ君、
ダメだね。
聞かせてよ。
一方からしか見られないから、夏日おばさんしかありえないって思い込んじまうのさ。別に夏日おばさんを擁護するわけじゃねえが、そんなハッタリのチェックメイトじゃ通用しねえってことさ。レシートを軸にした推理はまずまずだとは思う。筋は悪くない。
Now say the line, Battler.
だが、俺の採点じゃせいぜい65点ってとこだ。これが答案なら、居残りで補修ってとこだぜ。
You'd have remedial classes.
あら、じゃあレシートで封印されている扉をどうやって破ってお父様を失踪させられるというの？私の説いい？
エヴァおばさんの説は確かに面白い。そしてその説以外にじい様が失踪できる方法がないって言い切れるなら、最終目撃者である夏日おばさんが黒であると確かに言い切れるだろう。だが夏日おばさんが無実で濡れ衣である可能性が残っている以上、そうだと断言することはできね
え。Now say the line.
ならバトラ君は夏日姉さん以外の誰にお父様を失踪させられたというの？姉さんしかありえないのよ。私のレシートがそれを証明してしまったわ。一度目に書斎に訪れた夏日姉さん、そして二度目に私と訪れるまでの間、書斎は完全に密室で密室開封後には失踪している。これで夏日姉さんが犯人じゃないというなら、どんなトリックがあるっていうの？
え。だから65点なんだよ、エヴァおばさん。じゃあここで
There it is.
チェス盤をひっくり返すぜ。どうやって外部からじい様を失踪させるかじゃない。どうやって内部からじい様が失踪するかって考えるんだ。
チェスボールド
扉にはレシートが挟まれていたから使用されていない。窓も出ることはできても外側からは施錠できず、しかもエヴァおばさんは書斎を訪れた時に窓の施錠を確認している。だから窓も使用されていない。その時点では確かに書斎は密室だった。これは認めるしかない。だがしかし書斎は永遠に密室だったわけじゃない。レシートの封印さえ解かれれば扉は使用可能になり脱出可能になる。つまり夏日おばさんがどうやってじい様を失踪させたかじゃない。どうやってじい様は書斎を脱出したのかって考えるんだよ。じい様の書斎はただの書斎じゃねえんだよな。源氏さんの話じゃトイレからキッチン、ベッドルームまであるちょいとした家並みじゃねえか。例えばベッドの下にでも潜って隠れたらおばさんたちは部屋からいなくなったと思い込めるぜ。エヴァおばさんもそこまで調べてきたわけじゃねえだろ。そしておばさんたちは失踪したと思い開花へ戻る。この時レシートはもうない。つまりじい様は密室である間は部屋に隠れ続け、エヴァおばさんたちをやり過ごした後に部屋から脱出することでこの密室を破ることができる。
何よそれ。どうしてお父様がそんな妙なことをして部屋を抜け出さなきゃならないの？口頭無形にも程があるわよ。
ああ、口頭無形かもな。だがそれでも夏日おばさんが濡れ衣かもしれない可能性は示してる。エヴァおばさんのレシートは完璧じゃねえ。チェスで言えばチェックくらいにはなったろ。
でもチェックメイトじゃないよ。
だがチェックメイトじゃね
えじゃねえIt was だが、でも
そして、
oh my God、
俺が最高に気に入らねえのはそれを夏日おばさんに釈明しろと迫って、それができなきゃ黒だって断定しようとしたエヴァおばさんのその論法さ。それがまかり通るってんならこの後ろ宮バトラ、ここでもう一回チェス盤をひっくり返させてもらおうじゃねえか。
Objection. There he is. Oh my God, what a CG. He looks interesting in the PS3 art style. That's for sure. Look at him. He's ready to like defend his client. What if he becomes a lawyer when he's an adult? Fucking goes to law school. You get a spin-off that's basically Ace Attorney. That'd be interesting.
エヴァおばさん、あんたの論法によるならよ、あんたと秀吉おじさんが昨日親父たち6人を殺害してからのこのことゲストハウスに帰ったんじゃないってことを、
Yeah, exactly.
この場で釈明してもらわなくちゃならねえぜ。
Well, you say she killed Grandpa and also everyone else because you left a receipt. But what about you and Uncle just disappearing before everyone else went missing?
夏日おばさんに釈明を強いたんだ。あんたにはもちろん自身の潔白を釈明できるんだろうな。じい様の遺産が全部転がり込むエヴァおばさんよ。
そうだぜ。エヴァおばさんだって十分怪しいじゃねえかよ。母さんがじい様の最終目撃者だから怪しいって言うなら、エヴァおばさんだって父さんたちの最終目撃者じゃないか。バトラの言う通りだぜ。自分たちは殺してないってことを証明してみせろよ。
僕もお母さんの推理は少し勇み足だと思うな。レシートの件は確かに重要なヒントだと思う。でもそれはバトラ君の言う通り、夏日おばさんが何がしかの犯人であることを断定できるものじゃない。僕たちは等しく夏日おばさんだけが責められる道理はない。
誇り高きお父様が床に這いつくばってベッドの下に？ そんなざれ言で説明がつくと思って。
それならエヴァおばさんが先に特によ。誰がどうやって殺して、そして自分が関わっていないという証拠を示してみろってんだ。
Oh yeah, she has asthma. Jessica suddenly started coughing. At first I thought she was just choking after yelling too loud, but before long I realized how painful it looked. Jessica kept coughing and choking, down on her hands and knees.
ジェシカ、しっかり。なんじゃ先生。
ジェシカさん、吸入器を早く。私が持ってきているのがあります。
Dr. Nanjo pulled a bronchodilator inhaler from his own bag, which was lying on the sofa, and handed it to Jessica. Come to think of it, 6 years ago, didn't Jessica sometimes break into violent coughing fits and have to use that? However, 6 years ago, I never saw Jessica look like she was in this much pain.
兄貴、ジェシカってこんなに喘息ひどかったっけ？
ここ数年でだいぶ悪くなったんだよ。
Oh no, she's got lung cancer.
大丈夫な時はいいんだけどね。突然発作が来ると咳が止まらなくなるんだよ。
Or turbo asthma. Taking the inhaler from Kanon, Jessica used it with a practiced hand. It looked like her throat would still itch for a while, but she had it under control.
大丈夫かよ、ジェシカ。びっくりしたぜ。
大したことねえよ。心配すんじゃねえぜ。
Beads of sweat covered Jessica's whole body, and she couldn't hide her rough breathing, but it looked like her sudden attack had calmed down for now. This disturbance had made the dangerous atmosphere up until now seem slightly unfocused. But that's fine. That kind of battle of mutual suspicion is completely unnecessary. When you think about it, finding alibis for each other and looking for the culprit is probably meaningless. After all, we're just powerless, ordinary people. And when the police come tomorrow, they'll definitely employ cutting-edge techniques and investigate the case thoroughly. Can you imagine they take each person to a room and the cutting-edge techniques are good cop, bad cop? They slap Aunt Ava. They're like, did you do it? No. She gets slapped. Hey, you shouldn't slap her so hard. Don't worry, Aunt Ava. I'm here to protect you. And he turns to his partner. He's like, you can't be this rough with the with the potential witnesses. Solving all of the riddles and arresting the culprit.
確かにバトラ君の言う通りかしら。夏日姉さんが疑わしいように、私たちも疑わしさを拭えていない。それを今議論し合うのは確かに不毛ね。明日、警察に全てを任せれば済むだけの話よ。でも、バトラ君だって知りたいんじゃないの？犯人を。大切な人を失った痛みを思い知らせてやるために、1秒でも早く知りたいんじゃない？
それは否定しないです。これだけの上等を決めてくれやがった野郎を。たとえ1日であったとしても。でも、だからといって、18人の中の誰かを疑いたくはない。さっきはああ言ったが、俺は、エヴァおばさんだって疑いたくない。俺にとってのエヴァおばさんは、ちゃめっ気があって、いつも楽しくさせてくれる最高のおばさんだ。そんなおばさんと こんな罵り合いはしたくねえ。ここにいる誰だって、そんなことは望んでねえはずさ。だろ、みんな。
バトラ君に同じ。意味のない罵り合いだね。多分、これだけの人数が朝から一ところにずっと集まってるから、みんなストレスが溜まってるんだよ。
でしょうな。無理もないことです。言ってできるものではありませんが、なるべく皆さんリラックスしましょう。
エヴァ、わしらも頭を冷やすべきとちゃうか。レシートの件は確かにお父さんの失踪を探る上で重要な手がかりになると思うで。警察が来たら話すといいやろ。
そうね、そう。レシートの一件でつい鬼の首を取ったような気持ちになっちゃったのね。確かに夏日姉さんだけを疑うのはフェアじゃないわ。私たちだって等しく疑わしい。でもね、バトラ君、レシートの話だけは本当よ。これ忘れないでね。そしてこれがどういう意味を持つか、もう一度よく考えてみてね。
I was just thinking that as well, like a bit ago. Like when this paragraph started playing, I was like, that paragraph is that receipt is definitely very important. I'm willing to bet that Ryukishi wants us to think about it. And then here he's outright telling us, think about it. He's spelling it out for you. Aunt Ava and Uncle Hideyoshi stood up. It looked like they planned on leaving the parlor.
結局私たちはこんな推理ごっこしても意味はないのよ。だってどうせ警察が全て明かしてくれるんですもの。
That's right. Even if we don't play this detective game, the typhoon will pass. And when those lively seagulls return to the harbor, everything will settle itself. That's right. If you think about it, this kind of crime is completely trivial. It will definitely be resolved, even if we do nothing. When the seagulls cry. Umineko.
これ以上、夏日姉さんも私の顔を見ていたくはないでしょ。
Is that what it actually said, though? Let me...
これ以上、夏日姉さんも私の顔を見ていたくはないでしょ。
Actually, let me do it like this. Yeah. Umineko no nakukoru ni. Yeah. Literally. Title drop. That's so fucking funny.
これ以上、私も同じよ。確か姉さんは昨日、ゲストハウスに帰らなくて済むようにって客室を用意してくれたのよね。あそこはバスもトイレもあるし、鍵もチェーンもかかる。横になれるベッドもあるし、主人もマリアちゃんとチャンネル争いをせずにテレビを見ることができるわ。
She's still holding the gun.
お好きになさるといいでしょう。でもくれぐれも用心を。
ありがとう姉さん。そして余計なお世話よ。姉さんはみんなの監視をよろしくね。犯人はこの中に必ずいるんだから。そして姉さんも自分が監視をされていることをお忘れなく。
捨て台詞はそれで十分ですか？
ええ、十分よ。 じゃあね、夏日姉さん。源氏さん、夕食になったら呼んでね。それまでチェーンをかけて閉じこもってるわ。
源氏、カノ、お二人を客室までお送りを。
結構よ。送り狼なんて嫌だもの。むしろ、私たちが部屋に行くまで誰もこの部屋を出ないでくれる方が安心よ。ジョージ行くわよ。
僕は、ここでみんなといるよ。
ジョージ、この部屋に犯人がいるのよ。そんなところにいるつもり？
この部屋を出るということは、親族の誰かを疑うのと同じことだよ。僕は、あんな恐ろしいことができる人間が、親族にいるなんて信じない。
He's really spelling it out for you.
ジョージ、あなたからも言ってやってよ。
ジョージももう一人前の男や。そのジョージの仁義がこの部屋から出えへん言わせるなら、それも勝ってやろ。
She's gonna
好き
fucking
に
whip
させ
him
た
later.
れ。
父さん。
Aunt Ava and Uncle Hideyoshi left. The only voice that called after them was the sound of the rain. Now, one very important thing to remember, which I've brought up many times so far, is this. On the second twilight, those who remain shall tear apart the two who are close. The parlor was being buried beneath the savage atmosphere. When I looked at the clock, I was surprised to find it was already evening. Had we really spent that much time worrying about needless things, talking with each other, fighting with each other? Feeling bored, I started scratching at my head when Maria and I made eye contact. I was a little surprised since I thought she was completely immersed in the TV.
今なら信じるぜ。手紙も殺人もすべてベアトリーチェの仕業だ。いや、むしろ頼むからそうだと名乗り出てほしいぜ。19人目の仕業ってことにさせてくれ。じゃなきゃ俺たち18人はいつまでも互いを疑い合わなくちゃならねえ。これなら19人目の存在を信じる方がマシさ。扉も窓も開けずにじいさまを外へ連れ出すなんて。ベアトリーチェならお茶の子さいさいなんだろう。
Speaking of, very quickly. Okay, they're not missing or anything, but do they have anything else? Nope. Nope. It would have been funny if they would have changed her icon or her little portrait here to be her with like a gun. But yeah, it looks like no changes to their profiles. Maria, after taking a single short breath, hung her head and then raised her face again. She's possessed.
そうだよ。魔女の前に扉の鍵なんて何の役にも立たないんだよ。ベアトリーチェは72中の全てに精通する。33位のガープは望む相手を望む場所へ瞬時に運ぶ力を与えるし。
Does he? Let me double check. One sec. second. So, they're saying specifically that it's Gop, but let's see. G. Let's see. Was checking a few places, but let me just double check. He is described in the Lesser Key of Solomon. And what else? What do you quote-unquote do? A lot of this shit's taking forever to load. He's sometimes known as Tap. He is a president and a mighty prince. He appeareth when the sun is in some of the southern signs in a humane shape, going before him four great and mighty kings knowing philosophy and all the liberal sciences. He can cause love and hatred, make men insensible. He can teach you how to concentrate those things that belong to the dominion of Amaimun, his king, and can deliver familiars out of the custody of other magicians, blah, 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 blah. Specific about him involves him, able to open, you know, what are the quote-unquote abilities? Let's see. Key formation, etymology, what does he look like? Invocation, mentions, powers, here we go. Alright. So he can corrupt humans and realities, extend beyond generic demonic traits, intellectual subversion, emotional turmoil, and spatial domination, making him a unique agent of damnation. They tempt mortals into pacts, promising empowerment while ensuring spiritual ruin. His capacity to incite obsessive love or bitter hatred, manipulating the hearts to foster destructive relationships or vendettas. His power corrupts by amplifying passions, leading to betrayal, jealousy, and moral decay. Forbidden knowledge, rendering invisibility. There we go. Allowing evildoers to commit unseen atrocities, tempting thieves and conspirators into unchecked sin. And his swift transportation between kingdoms enables rapid escapes or invasions, corrupting through ambition and disruption of natural order. Unique is his ability to steal familiars from other magicians, disrupting rival occultists and escalating infernal rivalries, which breeds greed and discord among practitioners. He induces stupidity and ignorance. So, who's to say Kinzo isn't summoning Gop, for example?
彼女にとってどのような密室に閉じこもった人間だろうと連れ出すことは難しいことでも何でもないんだよ。
魔女はすげえな。頼むから。もしまだ事件を起こす気なら、絶対に人間には無理なことをして、俺に19人目を。いや、魔女の存在を信じさせてくれよ。
いいよ。あったら伝えておくよ。
Crap. Nothing's made sense to me for a while now. Just when I wanted to believe a 19th person, I deny it. Or believe in a 19th person, I deny it. And just when I want to believe there are only 18 people, I deny that too. Even though I want there to be more than just 18 people here, I can't accept the existence of that 19th person. In short, even though there are more than 18 people, there are less than 19. The number of people in this mansion is 19 is greater than X greater than 18. So the number of people can't be represented by an integer. However, it's impossible for there to be anything after the decimal point. You shouldn't be able to show the number of people with anything but an integer. And yet, 19 greater than X greater than 18. How do you explain the fraction less than 1? It's no wonder. That 19th person was something that couldn't be seen. That's why, since you can only write the number of people as an integer, you couldn't see that person. That witch cannot be seen, because Beatrice has no body. Therefore, she is invisible. Is there a 19th person, or not? Does the witch exist, or not? The witch exists somewhere in that X. And now it's 7. Okay. I think we're still going to keep going, but just give me a second. I'll be right back once more. Because I'm pretty sure things are about to get very, very, very interesting. Now that it's nighttime, that is. The uncomfortable atmosphere continued even after those two left. It was thick with the idea that simply thinking about the culprit's identity would be the same as deciding whom to suspect. Right. And I began to feel like discussion of the case was itself taboo. So no one mentioned the case, at least out loud. However, those thoughts were what filled our minds. All that we couldn't say out loud made our heads feel like they were going to explode. So, at least on the outside, the parlor had once again regained its calm mood. Everything was left unsettled.
少しだけ雨足が弱まった気がするね。
Because realistically, if you want to I don't know, if I was in this situation, right, with all these people, what I would probably suggest is no one leaves this room, in the sense that once it's nighttime, once everyone's going to bed, all the rooms will be closed, and everyone pick a chair. You're sleeping on that chair tonight. If someone dies, one of us will be woken up by someone doing the killing. It would be impossible to make it so that, 13 people? Or, 10, 11 people are somehow not able to see a murder being committed. You know? Anyway.
まだいっぱい降ってるよ。おー。
仮にやんだって、この島には船がねえんだしな。船が、明日すぐに来てくれりゃいいんだがよ。洋館バカンさんもうお腹いっぱいだぜ。
母さん、明日船はいつ来るのかな。
本来なら帰りの船は今日の3時に来てくれることになっていました。先方も台風が過ぎてから来直すと電話をしてくれたでしょうが、あいにく電話は普通ですから。でも向こうも子供の使いではありません。客人の方々の送迎目的だと教えてありますから。おそらく明日の朝一番で、多分9時頃くらいに来てくれるでしょう。
It was completely black outside. When I looked at the clock, I realized it was just past 7 o'clock. I was starting to get hungry. In the kitchen, Kumazawa was cooking enthusiastically. She had laid out a variety of dishes, and while they didn't match the level of Golda's artful cooking, they were still quite gorgeous. It was an act of kindness from Kumazawa, who was trying to enliven everyone's low spirits with some food. Kumazawa wasn't nearly as talented as a professional cook like Golda, but she was far from unskilled. On the contrary, since she had been brought up in a fishing village, the simple food she had created was sometimes highly praised. Kanon arranged the food Kumazawa had finished creating on the plates under her direction. Kanon also helped in the kitchen sometimes, but since he was rarely placed in that role, he was slightly awkward, even though he tried his best. Self-conscious about the fact that he couldn't cleverly arrange the food, Kanon's expression darkened slightly. But Kumazawa smiled as though everything was fine.
きれいに盛り付けられてますよ。カノン君もお上手ですよ。
シャノン姉さんだったらもっときれいに。
Okay, but she said that you were very jozu, so you should take that as a compliment. Kanon stopped arranging the food for a bit and hung his head. Oh no. Shannon was the one who always assisted Kumazawa in her cooking. Tonight, Kanon was doing it instead. And as he remembered Shannon's face and her brutal end, he grimaced.
今は忘れなさい。
Genji spoke kindly to Kanon as he advanced a pawn. Nanjo had escaped from the parlor once the mood had grown sour, and Genji had become his opponent in a game of chess upon Nanjo's request.
はい。今は忘れます。
それがいいだろう。
Genji purposefully refrained from facing Kanon as he spoke. He did so because he understood that it might make things tougher on Kanon if he noticed that someone was looking at his eyes. My god. On Kanon, like trying to say some of these words back to back with a shift in pronunciation is very hard sometimes. Nanjo also understood that and held back any thoughtless words.
金蔵さんもどこへ行かれたんでしょうな。ご無事だといいのですが。
わかりません。ただ、すべては親方様が望まれ、仕組まれたことのように思っています。それを邪推することは、親方様にお仕えする家具には過ぎたこと。
源氏さんは怖くないのですか。私には今夜まだ何か良くないことが
怖いことなど何も。私はただ後ろ宮家にお仕えするだけですので。
Nanjo sighed through his nose and made a carefully considered move. Nanjo was very slightly dubious. Could Genji possibly be thinking that he'd be left out of this? He couldn't even imagine what was happening inside this mansion. But he definitely couldn't deny the possibility that Kinzo had devised something. If you liken this island to chess, Kinzo had opened the game, and as a result, 6 pieces had been defeated. Could it be that Genji was calm because he believed he alone was on the outside of the chessboard and therefore safe? Nanjo thought about it. Isn't everyone just a piece on this chessboard, lined up equally without any exceptions? Wasn't even Genji, who had gained more of Kinzo's trust than anyone, no, who was confident of his position as Kinzo's only close friend, just another one of the pieces laid out on the chessboard?
Genji-san, 私は今夜が本当に怖いのです。無事に明日の朝を迎えられることを心より願っています。
The guest room Eva and Hideyoshi moved into had originally been built to house guests before the guest house construction. So until a few years ago, they had stayed in these rooms every family conference and were very familiar with them. This room was just like a room at a hotel, with a bedroom and a bathroom. So even though they were still shut in, it was far more comfortable than the parlor.
やっぱり家族だけだとリラックスできるな。他のみんなも 客室にこもって鍵をかけてりゃええんや。
夏日姉さんが客間を出るなって威張り散らしてるんだもん。誰も口答えなんてできないでしょ。あの人、ずーっと冷や飯を食ってきたから、兄さんが死んでやっと天下が来たって張り切ってんのよ。まったく、ずうずうしいったらあるしな。
まあそう言うな。夏日さんもあれで結構頑張っとるんやで。お前もそう突っかからんでもええやないか。さっきのレシートの件もあそこまでは言い過ぎやで。
だってあそこで言わなかったらもう言うタイミングがないんだもん。
Ava, soaking cutely and looking at the television, sat alongside Hideyoshi, who was laying on the bed. Or lying on the bed.
でも、こうして二人きりになるのはずいぶん久しぶりよね。
そうやな。思えば、わしもお前も老けたもんや。ジョージが生まれてから何もかもがあっという間や。
本当にあっという間よ。子供を作るの焦りすぎたかしら。
Ava's eyes looked like they were staring off into the distance. Yes, she had thought of it as a she had thought of it as a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Her older brother, Kaos, had been unable to father a child for quite some time. 6 years passed after his marriage to Natsuhi without any signs of pregnancy, which didn't please Kinzo at all. Ava herself had thought that, since her name would be moved outside of the Yoshinomiya register when she got married anyway, it didn't matter whether a successor to the headship was born or not. And then one day, she had a heavenly revelation. Or maybe it was the whisperings of the devil that she had listened to in her greed. If she could give birth to a successor first, wouldn't she be able to remain in the Yoshinomiya register? If things went well, might she have a chance to inherit the Yoshinomiya family herself? When she proposed this to Hideyoshi, he had approved of it instantly. This wasn't because Hideyoshi also had greedy thoughts. For Hideyoshi, who had no close relatives, it was a chance for him to feel once more the long-forgotten thing called family. So when they got married, he hadn't fussed over which last name they were to keep, and had quickly agreed to have his last name entered into the Yoshinomiya family register. It hadn't been easy to persuade Kinzo, but as his daughter, Ava knew Kinzo's personality well. So by choosing the time when Kinzo was most dissatisfied with Natsuhi, she was magnificently able to make him accept Hideyoshi as an adopted son-in-law. Looking at Hideyoshi, who had achieved success after starting from nothing, Kinzo might have seen a little bit of himself. He quickly grew to like Hideyoshi and approved his transfer into the Yoshinomiya register. George would eventually become the successor to the Yoshinomiya family. They had raised him strictly with that purpose in mind. He had been worth their while and had grown into a fabulous young man who wouldn't disappoint no matter where he went. That was why he had not been permitted to fall in love with a servant like Shannon. So when she'd learned that Shannon was dead and the engagement was now invalid, though part of her had still been shocked by the gruesome crime, part of her had also been relieved that her dear George wouldn't be stolen by some servant girl.
私
This background is also not a classic background, but that's okay.
クラウス兄さんのことが昔から嫌いだったわ。偉そうで威張ってて。自分がやがては当主になるのだと自慢してて。だから、それに一矢報いてやりたかった。でも、それは子供の頃の感情なのよ。でもその感情は、結局、自分の人生のほとんどを支配した。それだけならまだいい。その感情は、あなたやジョージまで巻き込んで振り回してしまった。
エヴァ、備え自分を責めるな。
Hideyoshi got up and held Ava's shoulder. She could feel a warm understanding from him.
わしはな、自分の人生はもうとっくに折り返しに入っとる。でもな、今日までの生活を後悔したことは一度もないで。一度もや。エヴァと一緒で他の男どもじゃ味わえん楽しい人生になったと思っとる。戦争で身寄りを失ったわしにもう一度家族のぬくもりを教えてくれた。だから後宮の家には感謝しとるし、わしの唯一の家だと思っとる。わしとお前が歩んできた人生にな、今日までほんまに楽しい人生やったで。
ありがとう、あなた。
Ava hung her head, burying her face in Hideyoshi's chest. Probably no one in the parlor could even imagine that this side of Ava existed.
感謝するのはわしや。今日までお前と一緒にいて後悔した日なんてあらへん。
私もよ。あなたと一緒になれてよかった。
ジョージももう立派な大人や。わしが見張ってなくてもしっかり仕事ができる一人前や。で正月あたりをのんびりモルジブあたりで過ごさんか。わしら二人水いらずや。
いやよ。毎年年賀状の返礼で寝る暇もないとか言ってるじゃない。
次の正月だけはなしや。年賀状はみん黙って下のお年玉くじだけチェックするんや。今年はカラーテレビくらい当てたいで。
やだ。モルジブでお年玉くじのチェックなんてしたくない。
じゃあそいつもなしや。水いらずのんびりでジョージが生まれる直前の新婚時代の続きをちょいとしてみんか。
それならいいわね。
モルジブはええとこらしいで。なんもない島に美しいサンゴ礁と水上コテージが並んでてな。
新婚時代の続きっていつからなの？
仕事納めしたらすぐや。旅行店に聞いてみんとわからんが、多分大晦日前には。
いや、今すぐがいい。
Ava nagged at his lip in a peevish yet flirtatious manner. The only sounds that filled the room were the distant voice of the announcer on the news, which Hideyoshi had left on, and the obnoxious pounding of the rain against the window. And Beatrice sitting in the chair in the corner. There was a knock on the door, and Genji entered.
奥様、お夕食の準備が整いました。お食事はまたこちらでよろしいですか？
ええ、ここへ運ばせなさい。南條先生はまだ厨房にいるのですか？
はい。次の一手を熟考したいとおっしゃっております。ご安心を。他の使用人たちとご一緒です。
源氏さんはじいさまの相手ができるくらいチェスが強いもんな。南條先生よりも強いらしいぜ。
そうなんだ。昔相手をしてもらったことがあるけど、あれは勝たせてくれたのかな。
マリア、もうすぐ飯だそうだぜ。しかし、よく一日中テレビを見ていて飽きねえな。
いつもテレビいっぱい見てるから平気。
マリアちゃんはテレビっ子なんだね。
She'd be watching like YouTube shorts the entire time or something. If this was set in 2022.
食事だから机の上を片付けないとダメだぜ。
Earlier, we had torn several pages out of Maria's notebook, and there was now a mess where everyone had been drawing together. Jessica began cleaning that up quickly. Still, everyone here really can draw. I'd never guessed. That's a subtle clue. That's a subtle hint. That, hey, looks like anyone could have done that sign outside. They're all pretty good at it.
エヴァさんたちにも、せめて食事くらい一緒にしないかとお声をかけ、どうせ断るでしょうが。
かしこまりました。
お父様の次はエヴァさんですか。つくづく、後宮家の食卓には全員が揃いませんね。
Natsui felt her headache start throbbing again and lightly held her temples. See, but why is her headache happening right now? Why didn't we get any hint of a headache when she was arguing with her sister a bit ago, when she was being accused and she held her sister at gunpoint. Well, sister, quote unquote. Remember when on the first day when they all met up together, all the adults got together, they started arguing and her headache was like pounding after just a few like 30-40 minutes. You'd think her headache would have been insane after she was accused by her sister that, hey, maybe you're the fucking killer because of this little trick I played on you. But why is it only now acting up, now that it's closer to nighttime? The distance from the kitchen to the parlor wasn't that great, so Genji had gone and come back by himself, but the guest room was a little farther away. Natsuki had warned him to avoid being alone whenever possible, and just now Nanjo had almost admonished him, saying it would be better if he held a little more concern for his safety. Kanon accompanied Genji, and the two of them went to visit Eva and Hideyoshi in their guest room. Genji knocked on the door.
Eva-sama, Hideyoshi-sama, お夕食の準備が整いました。
He waited a short while for them to come out, but there was no response.
源氏様、これは。
Kanon pointed under the door. A Western envelope had been inserted under it. Normally, when something was inserted this way, it'd be interpreted as a message from someone outside to someone inside the room. So, since this might be a private note meant for Eva and Hideyoshi, it was not something that Kanon and Genji were supposed to take interest in. But this Western envelope was one of Kinzo's, the same kind as the one Maria had taken out last night and surprised everyone with.
間違いない。親方様の封筒だ。
あるいは。
Even though this was one of Kinzo's envelopes, the letter Maria read aloud the previous night hadn't come from Kinzo. Genji continued knocking a little harder and called out in a loud voice.
Eva-sama! Eva-sama! Genji でございます。いらっしゃいますか？お返事をお願いいたします。Eva-sama!
But there was no response from the inside. Sometimes when the servants went to call some guests for a meal, the guests would be sleeping so deeply that they wouldn't wake up. In times like that, the servants would stick a letter in the door to show that it was time to come out, and leave the guests be. But despite that, Genji beat even harder on the door and called out Ava's name. However, there was no answer. Kanon stuck his ear up to the door, held his breath, and listened for any sounds coming from inside.
テレビの音らしきものが。でも、気配が感じられません。お部屋は空っぽかも。
Genji took out a handkerchief, and, careful not to touch it with his bare hands, gently pulled out the envelope that had been stuck under the door. It was sealed with a deep red sealing wax. Without a doubt, the mark on that sealing wax had come from the Yoshiromiya family head's ring.
Eva-sama! Eva-sama! どうかお返事を！もうお部屋にはいらっしゃいませんか？
But there was still no answer. There was a chance that those two were aimlessly walking around the mansion. This was the home Ava had grown up in. There was plenty of reason to think that she had gone out on a casual stroll. Genji groped around his pocket and pulled out the bundle of keys which contained the key that would open the guest room.
源氏様。
Kanon also understood what this meant. They would sometimes unlock the door so they could go in and do things like make the beds, but only after they made sure the guests were out. To unlock the door for any other reason, and especially to do so when there was a chance the guests hadn't given permission and might still be in there, was an action unbecoming of a servant. But Genji had decided. If the only problem had been that his knock hadn't received a reply, he wouldn't have gone this far. But the envelope under the door was doubtlessly one of Kinzo's, or rather, one of the Western envelopes of the Yoshiromiya family head. After last night, the sender of this envelope could be someone other than Kinzo. If this letter had been sent by someone else,
エヴァ様、申し訳ございません。お部屋を失礼させていただきます。
after giving that final notice, Genji stuck one of the keys from the bundle into the keyhole. There was a sound of the door unlocking. The chain! And after slowly turning the knob, he slowly started opening the door. Light seeped through the crack of the door. Were they in the room? Or had they forgotten to turn out the lights? Yep, the chain. It was the sound of the door chain being pulled tight. The chain had been secured. The chain couldn't be secured from the outside, so it also proved that they were in the room. The sound of the voices of the TV seeped out of the room. The lights, the chain, and the TV, all of these things made it clear that they were in the room. But there was no sign of them. Genji called to Eva once again through the crack of the door, but there was no answer.
Genji-sama, いかがしますか?
As part of their job, the servants were able to unlock almost any lock in the mansion, but they had no way to open a door with a chain. The only way to get the chain was to cut it. That was certainly not permitted as part of the servants' usual work. A creepy chill had already rushed up their backs. Canon held his breath again and tried to sense someone through the door, but even so, he was not able to sense anyone.
私は奥様をお呼びしてくる。カノンのチェーンの切断を。
はい。
As Kanon hurried away to get a cutting tool, Genji called him to a stop.
待てカノン。厨房に戻り、熊沢と行動するように。断じて一人で行動してはならんぞ。
はい、かしこまりました。
It looked like Kanon was wondering why he had to do something so troublesome in the middle of this urgent situation, but Genji had said it out of wariness. He didn't care what happened to himself, but in the worst case scenario, he didn't want anything to happen to Kanon. In the kitchen, Kumazawa was piling food on the serving cart, and Nanjo was waiting for Genji, apparently wanting to show him a move he'd finally thought up that might turn the tables on him. But Genji's appearance immediately told him that something was wrong.
おや、どうしましたか、源氏さん。
南條先生、申し訳ありませんが、この勝負は一度中断させてください。カノンはチェーンを頼む。熊沢、食事の配膳は一時中断し、カノンと同行するよう。私は奥様のところへ行く。南條先生もご一緒に。
何かあったんですかな。
Genji took Nanjo, who still didn't know what was going on, and quickly left the kitchen.
熊沢さん、申し訳ありませんが、僕と一緒に。
何があったんですか、カノンさん。
Sorry, I'm a little excited to see what happens. Masawa almost said exactly the same thing as Nanjo, unable to take in the situation and chased after Kanon, who had flown out into the hallway. Taking Kumasawa with him, Kanon went to a storage room and looked through the tools packed in the toolboxes and hanging all over the walls, trying to find something that could be used to cut the chain.
何を探してるんですか。私も手伝いますよ。
ドアチェーンを切断するんです。大きめの番線カッターはどこだ。
ドアチェーンをどうしてそんなことをするんですか。
エヴァ様たちのお部屋にチェーンが中にいらっしゃるはずなのに、お声をかけても返事がないんです。
It took Kumasawa some time to figure out how cutting the chain and Eva and Hideyoshi not answering were connected, but she did realize that this was an urgent situation.
これなら多分。
Kanon took down a very large wire cutter that had been hanging on the wall. It was called a cutter, but maybe it'd be easier to understand if we said it was shaped like a large pair of pliers. Kanon remembered once being warned that this dangerous tool could easily cut through one of your fingers. Kanon took that and rushed up the stairs. He already knew instinctively. He should fight for every minute, every second to open it quickly. Or perhaps it was already...
待ってください、カノンさん。
早く!
She's old, she can't. Kumazawa eventually caught up with him, gasping for breath with both hands on her knees. When Kanon changed his grip on the wire cutters and looked up at the door, he let out an "ah," struck speechless.
何ですかこれは。
Interesting. I think I've seen this symbol before. Well, for all we know, Maria's gonna be like, oh, it's so-and-so. Kumazawa screamed weakly, her face pallid. There was no surprise, because right there, on the door, just like the magic circle that had been drawn in the shutter of the Rose Garden storehouse, there was another eerie shape drawn with blood-like paint. However, it would be odd to call this one a magic circle, because unlike what most people would expect, it wasn't a circle with shapes drawn inside it, but a slightly more complicated geometrical shape, like a sigil. However, those strange characters filling in the gaps, which weren't from the alphabet, were the same kind as the ones in the magic circle on the shutter. Okay, so it's probably not a sigil, because it's using Hebrew. But the thing that had Canon struck speechless wasn't how eerie the magic circle was. It was that something like this hadn't been here a short while ago. First, he had taken a trip back to the kitchen. After that, he'd gone to the storage room to grab a tool and headed right back. Put those together and it could have been more than 5 minutes. How could someone add something this creepy during that period of time? As though it had just been drawn, almost like the door itself was bleeding, several unsettling vertical red lines slowly dripped down, getting longer and longer. Kumazawa's knees gave away and she sank down on the spot. If Kumazawa hadn't done this first, then Kanon surely would have wanted to.
Beatrice-sama. ベアトリーチェ様の仕業ですよ。恐ろしや恐ろしや。
Kennen gulped, then readied the wire cutter and approached the door. He didn't want to get close to this disturbing magic circle, and he really didn't want to touch the steadily dripping substance that looked like blood. But if he didn't get close, he wouldn't be able to cut the chain. Fighting this cold feeling, he gulped again, and after gathering his courage, he went even closer, putting the wire cutter up against the chain. And impressed with all his strength, managing to cut through the chain far more easily than he'd anticipated. The cut chain fell into 2 separate parts, which continued to clang as they swayed back and forth.
Kanon-san, 足元に封筒が。
Another one?
しかもこれは親方様のもの。
It looked like Kumazawa had also noticed the Western envelope at the bottom of the door. Okay, never mind, so they didn't take it with them. And that the sealing wax had been sealed with the head's ring. Kennen hesitated for just a second over whether he should open the letter first or check inside the room, but he eventually decided on fulfilling his original purpose. Kennen pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket. This was so he wouldn't leave fingerprints on the door. If his worst fears were realized, the police would want to investigate this room too. He slowly pushed the door open. He was able to more clearly hear the sound of the television, which had been seeping out faintly this whole time.
Eva-sama.
Eva was lying face up on the bed with her shoes still on. Kumazawa, who had fearfully entered after Kanon had been hiding behind his back, screamed a short "eek" again as she saw Eva like that. Eva's shoes had been the first part of her that Kanon had seen, so the oddness of wearing shoes in bed was the first thing to strike him. But when Eva's head shifted into his line of sight, Kanon couldn't help but let out a short scream like Kumazawa. Right in the middle of Eva's forehead, something had been placed. Something was growing there. No. Right in the center of her forehead. Was it an old-fashioned knife? That or some weapon like it was sticking out. At the base of where it was stuck in, blood dripped down, staining the sheets on the other side bright red. Kumasawa's knees gave way once more, and she sank down on the floor. Her mouth kept flapping open and closed, but she couldn't even scream. Ava was dead with some kind of weapon sticking out of her forehead. Both eyes were open wide, and the image of the person who killed her must have been burned into them. But the only mouth capable of naming that person had been shut for all eternity. Even though her forehead was the last place they'd wanted to look, they couldn't tear their eyes from it. Right there, the weapon was stuck into Ava's forehead, standing almost perfectly upright. And on the handle was a complicated design that you wouldn't expect to see on an ordinary weapon. That thing could be summed up with the word occult. It was a vulgar object with a design that might have been that might have been of some demon. Ava was on top of her bed, but the other bed was empty. Where was Hideyoshi? After taking a backwards glance at Kumasawa, still on her knees and stupefied, he checked the bathroom just in case. At the moment he opened the door, he was greeted by steam and the sound of the shower. The bathroom was of the same familiar styles as most hotel bathrooms. When taking a shower, a waterproof curtain was used to keep water from flying out. That waterproof curtain was half open. And lying tumbled down in the bathtub was Hideyoshi, completely naked, with both eyes open. And pointing right at Kanon, just like Ava, a weapon with a demon-like design was stuck into his forehead. Since his head had been under the shower's hot water this whole time, his face wasn't half covered and filthy with blood like Ava's had been. But the sight of him dead, while still taking a shower, was tragic enough. Just then, they heard Natsui's voice coming from the hall. She was probably coming with Genji.
またしてもこのような落書きが。この手紙は中には何と。
いえ、まだ読んでおりません。
うかつに触らん方がいいですが、犯人の指紋が残っとるかもしれん。警察に渡した方がいい。
わざわざ手紙を残すくらいです。どうせ指紋など残っていません。
As Natsui said that, she picked up the envelope. And before checking its contents, she entered the room herself where she found Ava dead.
エヴァさん。
奥様、こちらには秀吉様も。
これはむごいですな。
カノン、シャワーを止めてあげなさい。気の毒にも程があります。
はい。
Kanon gripped his handkerchief and twisted the valve, turning off the shower. In the bathtub, a small jar of body soap had fallen with its cap off. It really looked like he had been attacked while taking a shower. There was still a small splash of blood clinging to the white bathtub, and the combination of red and white made a horrible contrast.
南條先
生。わかったな。死犯は出とらんな。死後硬直も始まっとらん。おそらく殺されてから1時間経ったかどうかというところだろう。しかしこのような柄の短い凶器で頭蓋骨を。
Nanjo checked their pulse and their pupils, making certain of their deaths once more. As Kanon watched this businesslike treatment, he thought, couldn't you tell at a glance that they were dead without doing all of that? Nanjo thought about removing the weapon, but then decided it'd be better to preserve the scene and hand it over to the police, so he left it alone. But a close inspection of the base showed that it didn't have a blade. In fact, it was more conical than blade-shaped. He noticed that rather than a knife, it was more like a short-handled spear, something with a shape better suited for thrusting than slicing. Rather than the short spear, you might call it a thick ice pick. At any rate, after looking at the scene, no further words were needed to describe what sort of terrible purpose such eerily designed weapons were originally made for. Nor was it necessary to explain how they carried out their function. Natsuhi, hoping to escape the repulsive steam filling the bathroom as soon as she could, covered her mouth with a handkerchief and dashed from the room. Just viewing their gruesome bodies for an instant had been enough to burn the image into her eyes. If she looked any longer, that image would surely remain in her vision for all eternity. The rising urge to vomit was exactly the same feeling she'd had that morning at the garden storehouse. For a while, Natsuhi couldn't help but stand with her back facing the guest room, fighting that sickness in her stomach.
とにかくこの部屋を子供たちにジョージ君に見せるわけにはいきません。至急この部屋を閉じなさい。
見せられませんとも。両親のこんなむごい姿をとてもジョージさんには。
But they could tell that those fiercely racing footsteps in the hallway belonged to George, even before he came dashing into the room. George and the other children had been waiting in the parlor. However, when they saw Genji speak with Natsuhi, when they saw her turn pale and fly out of the parlor, they felt a sense of foreboding. And when they saw a large group of people gathered around the guest room, they were sure of it.
Tosa! Kasa!
なんだよこれ。また魔法陣かよ。
エヴァおばさんたちは無事なんだよな。おい、カノン君、これは何の騒ぎなんだ。
バトラ様。
Kanon didn't have to say anything. George's scream after he ran into the room told them everything they needed to know.
誰がこんなことを。殺してやる。
ジョージ君、しっかり。
Natsuhi touched George's shoulder with her hand, but he violently shook her off. George fell over beside Ava and buried his face in the bed in front of his mother's face, wailing. Then he pounded on the bed with his fists over and over again.
ジョージ兄さん、しっかり。バトラ様。
Battler had his back against the wall of the hallway and was covering his eyes with his right hand, weeping without restraint.
ひでえぜ。心に決めた女を婚約した次の日に失った。同じ日に親父とおふくろまで殺されるなんてよ。そんなのあんまりにもむごいじゃねえか。
Of course, it's sad when anyone dies, no matter who it is. But to Battler, those left alone by the deaths of others were far more worthy of pity. Everyone here and now had lost someone close to them. George wasn't the only one to be pitied. However, George's pain was far greater than anyone else's.
バトラ。
そりゃよ、人はいつか死ぬぜ。人間、誰だっていつか死別の悲しみと戦わなきゃならねえ日が来るだろうよ。でもよ、そいつは兄貴にとってはずっと未来の話で、しかもそいつは一つずつ順番に訪れるべきもんじゃねえかよ。むごすぎるぜ。やろう。少しは人の情けってもんがねえのかよ。
ないの。
Maria tried to comfort Battler in a mechanical sounding voice. Battler violently wiped his tears.
ああ、くそ。もう流さねえぜ。悔し涙も悲しみの涙ももう二度と流さねえぜ。ああ、全然ダメだ。俺たちは魔女様に爪を食らってるわけだ。主勢一方ってわけだ。そりゃダメだぜ。全然ダメだ。チェス盤がひっくり返っちまうぜ。野郎は俺たち羊が明日まで逃げる手段もなく怯えてるだけだろうと思ってるだろうよ。だからひっくり返すぜ。明日までこの島から逃げられねえのは野郎も同じだ。しょんべんちびりそうになりながら逃げ隠れするのは俺たちじゃねえ。暴いてやるぜ。必ずな。明日までに。いや、今夜中にその胸札をつかみ上げてやる。
とにかくこの部屋は警察が来るまでこのままにして施錠します。いいですね。
Natsuki announced it as though she didn't care whether they agreed or not. If anyone had a right to object, it would have been George, but he looked as though he'd shed enough tears. George nodded slightly, still facing away from the others. And when he stood up, everyone else agreed too. Natsuki still hadn't opened that western envelope of the family head she'd picked up. But now that they decided to leave this room, she decided to unseal it in the parlor where everyone could watch. Would be a dick move to end the stream right now, wouldn't it? And leave you all hanging until next week. Or if you're watching on YouTube, until the next video. As soon as they walked out into the hallway to head back to the parlor, some of them immediately felt something out of place. Or maybe sensed something strange.
答えよ。
マリアもわかるか。こりゃ何の匂いだよ。ひでえ匂いだぜ。
When everyone sniffed the air, they did notice a horrible burnt smell drifting through the hallway, one that none of them had smelled until then.
私、ちょっと厨房を見てきます。火はちゃんと消したはずなんですよ。
After noticing a burnt smell, it was natural that Kumazawa, who had just been using the burner in the kitchen, suspected that her own slip-up had caused it. Kumazawa hastily dashed away.
カノン、熊沢と行きなさい。一人にさせないように。
はい。
After nodding at Genji's order, Kanon followed after her. He wasn't running, but as he followed her, he tried to search for the cause of the smell in other directions as well. Like a dog, just sniffing upwards.
臭い。
これは確かに鼻が曲がりそうな匂いですね。しかし換気のために窓を開けてもいいものか。
Natsuki was reluctant to open the windows in a situation where self-defense was so important.
換気扇を回させましょう。窓を開ける必要はないと思います。
ジョージの兄貴、話しかけても大丈夫かよ。
犯人を探す相談なら構わないよ。
It seemed that George had managed to climb out of the abyss of sorrow. All that filled his chest now was the quiet flame of hatred towards the culprit who had stolen the lives of the ones he loved and his beloved and his beloved parents.
部屋にはチェーンがかかってた。さっき構造を見たが、とても外から細工できる代物じゃねえ。つまり完璧な密室だったってことだ。
そうなるね。バラ庭園の倉庫の時はシャッターの鍵を 使用人室からこっそりと持ち出したのだろうとか、あるいは複製の鍵を持っていた可能性とか、いくつか方法が想像できた。でも、チェーンは一般に浸透した施錠方法の中で、最もシンプルに密室を構築できる。
Right. So unlike Kinzo's room, which is, you know, a room with a door that has a very, you know, specific mechanism to open and close it, or unlike the Rose Garden storehouse, in which they could have snuck out with a key, this room specifically was chained from the inside, and the only way in was to break the chain or undo it.
チェーンだけは物理的に破壊しない限り外からはどうにもならないぜ。じゃあつまり犯人は扉からは出入りしなかったってことなのか。
こりゃ面白いや。つい数時間ほど前にも扉以外でどうやって部屋から出入りしたのかってみんなで騒いだ気がするぜ。
How ironic. Back then, we were all losing our cool, wondering how grandfather had disappeared from his room. The receipt Aunt Ava stuck in the door in a whim proved that the door had remained sealed. And since Aunt Natsuhi was the only person to enter or exit during that time, she was under suspicion. Aunt Ava proposed a theory about how Aunt Natsuhi might have thrown grandfather out the window and left by the door herself. But this door is much simpler. It was sealed from the inside by the door chain. The window had also been locked from the inside, and the bodies had been inside the room. This time it really had been, without exaggeration, a true closed room. That's right. If you include grandfather's disappearance, 3 cases have occurred, and all 3 times the door has been the point of interest, as we can see here. This was the first shutter. There was a key in the servant room, and if we assume someone knew about that, this can't really be called a closed room. The next was the door sealed by the receipt. However, Aunt Natsuhi entered that room. So if grandfather had left through the window or had been thrown out, she would have been able to lock the window before escaping. Or, like my theory, grandfather could have hidden until the receipt was gone and left the room later. Basically, this door can be defeated with a handful of desperate tricks. In that sense, you really can't call this a closed room. You can't really call this one a closed room either. However, now we have the door sealed with the door chain. Finally, we have to give up. The window, the door, everything had been locked. It was a perfect closed room. The first hadn't been a closed room because everyone could be suspected. The second hadn't been a closed room because Aunt Natsuhi could be suspected. But this time, no one can be suspected. This was the perfect closed room because the door chain formed a seal that blocked everyone equally well.
なら、犯人は室内に入らずに犯行に及んだ。部屋の外から何らかの方法で。
Uh-oh. Do you see where they're standing? They're next to the portrait.
確かにチェーンである以上人が通れるほどは開けなくても多少の隙間を開けることができる。ノックして顔を覗かせたところを襲うとか。いや、甘いか。
甘いよな。エヴァおばさんの遺体が扉のすぐそばだったならそれも考えたぜ。だがエヴァおばさんは部屋の奥のベッドの上。しかも秀吉おじさんはバスルームだった。チェーンの隙間からでは姿を見ることもできねえし、手を伸ばすこともできねえ。ちくしょう、全然ダメだぜ。さっぱりだ。
Something was tugging softly at my sleeve. It was Maria. Oh.
おお、満足？
満足って何がだよ。
Uh-oh.
バトラは親族の誰かを疑うのが嫌だから、犯人はベアトリーチェであってほしいと願ったよ。だからベアトリーチェは叶えた。バトラが言った通り、絶対に人間には無理なことをして、バトラに魔女のなのにわがまま。
I tapped Maria, who was laughing unpleasantly on the head with my fist.
ああ、叶えてくれてありがとうよ。今のはその礼と、不謹慎な時に笑ったことへの教育的指導だ。それより教えやがれ。エヴァおばさんたちの部屋の扉にも、また怪しげな落書きがされていた。あれもまた魔法陣なのか？
Well, obviously not.
あれは特に覚えやすい特徴的な形なんだから、あのくらい知っててほしいね。
He punched her again.
知らねえから花を持たせてやってんだ。ごちゃごちゃ言わねえで解説しろい。
バトラは暴力的だね。あんまり意地悪すると教えないよ。あ、痛い。言うよ、このげんこつ男。あれは月の1の魔法陣だよ。
Eh? Alright, let's take a look. First magic circle of the moon. Oh yeah, here it is. One sec. Let me see if I can find a better image. Here we go. This. Sadly, I can't read this one because I don't speak Hebrew. But this is what it looks like when it's not smudged and a little blurry because of the blood. But here it is. Now, I did see some depictions of it having, like, a little moon on top as well. Like, just imagine, you see how there's, like, a little pillar in the middle? Imagine right above that, a picture of, like, a moon. Like, you know, like, just a crescent moon. Just right above it, in black. But this is the first magic circle of the moon. I'll keep some info on it open just in case. But they're probably about to explain it, so I don't want to, like I did last time with the Circle of the Sun, where I just spent like 30 minutes talking about it, reading the things in Latin that were inscribed upon it. I'll let her explain, and then we'll see if there's anything missing.
何の意味がある？その魔法陣のご利益は？書かれてるヘブライ語の意味は？
記されているのは旧約聖書詩編第107編の16節。主は聖堂の扉を破り、鉄の管抜きを打ち破ってくださいました。
Ironic, okay.
魔法陣の効用は2つ。
For he has broken the gates of brass and cuts through the bars of iron.
一つはいかなる方法によって閉ざされた扉でも開くことができる。
そりゃ便利な魔法だぜ。つまり魔法の力に頼らなきゃ開けぬ密室の扉っていう。もう一つの効用は、
開かぬ扉を八方塞がりの事態に見立て扉を開く。難解な事態の時に用いることで、それまで思いつきもしなかった解決策を与えてくれるんだよ。平たく言うと、観察力や洞察力、 ひらめきや直感を授けてくれるんだね。ベアトリーチェはバトラごとき人間風情にこの扉の開き方がわかるものかって挑発してるんだよ。あ、痛い。
Okay, so let's think about this. For he has broken gates of brass and cuts through bars of iron. When you're blocked by unopenable doors in all directions, it opens a door. By using it in a difficult situation, it gives you a solution you hadn't thought of until then. Generally speaking, you receive the powers of observation and discernment, inspiration and intuition. Interesting. Okay. It's so ironic with the whole actual, like, there being a literal chain stopping them too. Okay, that's quite peculiar. Before we do continue, let's look at these. Oh my god. Ushiromiya Eva, found on the bed of a guest room inside the mansion with a weapon resembling an ice pick sticking out of her forehead. Ushiromiya Hideyoshi. Ah, so Maria is the one providing all these descriptions. Found in the bathroom of the same guest room that Eva was found in. Like Eva, there was a weapon resembling an ice pick sticking out of his forehead. You can't see either of them by looking through the gap of the door while the chain is set. You can't see them, so you can't reach them. How... Hayes, how could a possibly... I guess... So how could a human possibly kill them? Interesting. So who tore their faces off? He has a right to lament his ill fortune. Okay. What about Hinzel? He's still just missing.
よーし、もう黙れご苦労。上等だぜ。その魔女の挑戦、受けてやる。
マリアちゃん、この世に魔女も悪魔も存在しない。父さんと母さんは誰かが殺した。それが僕のよく知る人間なのか、知らない人間なのかはわからない。でも、そのどちらであっても、必ず人間なんだ。
しかし、どうやって？せいぜい10センチ程度しか開かない扉の隙間から、どうやったら室内の2人を？
それにしても耐え難い匂いです。一体何事なのですか
Kanon and Kumazawa, who had gone on ahead, realized the smell wasn't coming from the kitchen, even before they arrived there. That was because they noticed an even thicker wave of stench rising up from the stairs leading to the basement, which they passed on their way to the kitchen. Uh-oh.
またボイラーの調子が悪いんでしょうか。
Those stairs led to the underground boiler room. The mansion's boiler was old and in poor condition. Oh, imagine it fucking burst open and flooded. Both of them had witnessed problems with the boiler on several occasions, but they had never smelled the boiler belching out a stench like this before. The thing they heard from the basement was definitely the sound of a door closing. Kumazawa had phrased it as a question, but she already knew it couldn't be anything else. Kumazawa was so surprised at the sound that her knees gave way yet again and she cowered. After all, at that very moment, no one could have been in the boiler room. Just a few seconds ago, everyone had been crowded together around Eva and Hideyoshi's room. So who caused the sound of a door closing just now?
Kanon-san!
After taking a second to sort out the situation, Kanon ran down towards the basement. Since they heard the sound of a door closing just now, and there was no sign of anyone coming up the stairs, the person who had closed the door had to be inside the boiler room just now. If the boiler room had been a dead end, Cannon wouldn't have rushed in so hastily. But Cannon was a servant, so he knew. There were two entrances to the boiler room, one that opened to the mansion and one that opened to the courtyard. If he didn't chase them now, they might slip away. Kumasawa reached the same conclusion long after Cannon did. But she couldn't let him go alone. If the thing in the boiler room was the culprit, an opponent who had easily killed 6 adults in the first murder, then no matter how Cannon confronted them, he wouldn't be a match. Of course, with this argument, even if Kumasawa joined him, it wouldn't change anything. At any rate, after a delay, Kumasawa decided that she mustn't let Cannon go alone, so she rushed down the stairs. At that time, Cannon was already in the boiler room. The boiler room's characteristic damp heat tormented him. It had always been an unpleasantly smelly and hot place, and on top of that, the room was full of that horrible stench, which made Cannon feel like he was going to be sick. There was no doubt that this room was the source. In that case, Cannon should have been searching for where the smell was coming from. However, Cannon kept gazing straight forward as he grabbed a hatchet from the tool shelf just off to the side of the door. He hadn't stretched out his hand because he wanted a hatchet. He wanted to grab a weapon, any weapon. Why? Cannon gazed into the darkness, where the naked light bulb couldn't pierce. Then, he answered.
ルーレットは数字と赤黒にかけて配当を競い合う。だが、赤か黒かのようなリスクの低い賭けはその程度の配当しか与えられない。
The words coming from Cannon's mouth were swallowed up by the darkness. The darkness suddenly started to swirl, glittering. Glittering. It was such a fantastical scene. Golden sparkling butterflies that hid in the shadows all over the boiler room flapped their wings, twinkling beautifully, and gathered in the darkness, disappearing. Cannon continued speaking, directing his words at the darkness as it swallowed the butterflies up. What if, before we continue, what if these are not butterflies? And they are sparks of some kind. And something terrible is about to happen to Cannon. But as the butterflies gathered in the darkness, they they would certainly laugh. But Cannon continued to speak without faltering in the slightest.
逆により的中率の低いかけ方をすれば、そのリスク、親方様は天文学的なリスクを的中できることを奇跡と呼び、その結果得られる天文学的な配当を魔法と呼んでいた。親方様とお前がどんな魔法を求めてルーレットに挑んでいるのか。しかしお前は忘れている。ルーレットには赤でも黒でもない目が出うることを忘れている。
What was I would say? Is it the Devil's Zero? Roulette has a special pocket called Zero, which means that the house takes everything in certain variants of the game. This means that all of the coins bet on the table will be swept up, just as though everyone has forfeited.
僕は一つだけ心に決めていた。もしシャノンが殺されて僕が生き残るようなことがあったなら、この身を投げ出してお前のルーレットをすべて台無しにしてやろうと。これは親方様が決めたルールでも、ましてやこのルールは僕が作った。僕はもう家具じゃない。お前のルーレットのゼロなんだ。
Cannon's face twisted with humiliation. It was clear that his defiance against his own weakness was being ridiculed somehow. Cannon's brow creased even further, and a fierce expression that he'd never shown to anyone appeared on his face. The hand grasping the hatchet was shaking. His sweat became drops, which slid downward. It was clear that the emotion causing Cannon's hand to shake wasn't just anger. However, Cannon suppressed that emotion.
僕はもうお前の言葉に惑わされたりはしない。悪魔のルーレットはこれでおしまいだ。地獄にてさらに1000年。次の召喚者を待つがいい。ベアドリーチェ
！When Cannon raised the hatchet and tried to dive into the darkness definitely sneered. It sneered at the courage, as if it were vulgar, lazy, futile, and meaningless. Cannon, his hatchet still held aloft, couldn't take another step after that. With a clang, the hatchet that he'd been grasping fell and rolled to the floor. And following that with a pair of thuds, Cannon's knees hit left and then right. That hand, which looked like it was trying to catch the sky, now that the hatchet had been dropped, it gradually lowered, landing on his chest. Then, the other hand did the same. Right there, a handle with a demon-shaped design was buried into his chest. The same type of weapon that had been stabbed into Eva and Hideyoshi's foreheads was now in Cannon's chest. Cannon was curled up in anguish, fresh blood dribbling from the corner of his mouth. It was makeup too extreme for Cannon's white skin. Around this scene, the glittering gold butterflies danced through the darkness, mesmerizing. It was a beautiful, beautiful dance. A funeral march of tribute, ridicule, and contempt for a single boy's self-sacrifice. Cannon had already been prepared for his own death, but although he could do nothing but accept the death he had received, he attempted one last measure of resistance. He grasped the handle of the weapon sticking into his chest with both hands, and gritted his teeth with an acute, unearthly pain. He pulled it out. For only a moment, a bright red spray gushed out. It made an unpleasant bloop sound. It probably resembled the sound of Cannon's soul as it was sucked into the swamp of the dead.
Cannon-san? 誰か
Kumazawa screamed at the incomprehensible sight in front of her. Cannon was lying in a pool of blood. Kumasawa's heart was a complete mess. Ah, what a horrible fate. He wouldn't have been killed if he had been with him. If I had been with him. What incredible luck. If I had been with him, I might have been killed too. As she screamed, her expression was filled with complete confusion, and all of the muscles in her face were pulled up, almost as though she was smiling while crying. But no one could have made fun of an expression like this.
何事ですか、熊沢。返事をしなさい、熊沢。
The first one to dash in was Natsuhi holding the rifle. Battler and Genji dashed in after her. Normally, they probably would have started discussing the origin of that violent stench filling the boiler room. But after they saw Kanon, who was lying on the ground as if he were drowning in an ocean of his own blood, the stench wasn't important anymore.
カノン、返事をしなさい。源氏、南條先生をここに。
To do what? Natsuhi realized that even though Kanon was on the verge of death, he was still conscious, so he sent Genji to get the doctor. And Natsuhi, holding the rifle aloft, faced the darkness in the center of the boiler room and shouted.
そこに隠れているものは何者です。おとなしく出てきなさい。そちらから出てこないなら容赦なく撃ちます。
ライトだ。おばさん、照らすぜ。
No. Battler, thinking quickly, took a large flashlight. Okay, I thought he was gonna bust out a lighter. Took a large flashlight from the tool shelf alongside the door and used its light to cut through the darkness Natsuhi was glaring into, but the light only shone on mechanical-looking piping and a door. The door had been left open, a small crack, and it was obvious that someone had left through there in a hurry.
夏日おばさん、あの扉はどこへ？
源氏、あの扉はどこに通じているのですか？
中庭です。
逃がすかよ。くそ、この野郎！
Battler let out a war cry as he slammed into the door. Cool air from outside suddenly rushed in. There were some thin, rough stairs leading up. Battler ran up them, shouting.
待ちなさい、バトラ君。一人では危険です。
Natsuhi was also rushing up the stairs, chasing after Battler. They were in the courtyard of the mansion that had been built strictly for lighting purposes, so it wasn't a very elegant place. Because it was surrounded on all sides, the air was calm and completely undisturbed, even though they could hear the sound of strong winds. There was only the gentle, sorrowful rain. As he ran through the cold and scattered raindrops, dashing up the stairs into the courtyard, Battler looked in every direction. Of course, the odds of him finding a suspicious silhouette just standing around nonchalantly were pretty much zero. Battler spun, looking all around. He turned again and again. He kept spinning until he almost lost his sense of direction. He prayed that he could see the culprit somewhere in the scenery, but there was no chance. All he saw as he spun was more and more of the mansion's heartless walls and windows. Furthermore, there were two entrances into the mansion from the courtyard, and neither of them were locked. Because the courtyard couldn't be entered from outside the mansion, the doors had been built without locks. He didn't know which one they left through. He had to give up. Battler pounded the wall with his fist, swearing.
バトラ君、一人で先走ってはダメです。バトラ君。
Battler pressed his forehead against the wall, which he scratched at with his fingernails as he cried.
畜生。畜生、畜生。エヴァおばさんに、秀吉おじさん。さらにカノン君かよ。6人も殺しやがった。飽き足らずさらに3人も殺しやがった。ふざけるな、ふざけるな。エヴァおばさんも秀吉おじさんも昔からいつも優しくしてくれる愉快なおばさんたちだったじゃねえかよ。カノン君とは昨日会ったばかりだが、きっとこれから仲良くなれたと思うぜ。なんで殺したんだ。どうして人ってのはな、殺しちまったらな、タケノコみてえにひょいひょい生えてきちゃ来ねえんだぞ。どうして殺すんだよ。どうして
Battler was a boy who could understand the feelings of pain and regret in a person's heart. So he cried, with all his strength. Natsuhi, who had always thought of Battler as a frank person, was a little surprised to find that he had this delicate side. And at the same time, she understood how easily hurt the heart of a young person could be. So she held him.
大丈夫です。あなたも、ジョージ君も、マリアちゃんも、ジェシカも、母として、そして、後宮家の代表として。
Battler, after sobbing into Natsuhi's chest for a while, wiped his tears with a bitter smile, as though he had been like that the whole time, and tried to appear as though he cried more than enough already.
とにかく、一度下に戻りましょう。犯人を探すより、自分たちの身を守る方が最優先です。明日になれば船が来る。そうすれば警察がやってきて、全てを白日のもとにさらし出し、犯人がどうあがこうとも、この島から逃げられるものですか。
そうっすね。警察さえ来れば。
When the seagulls cry... Okay, I thought he was going to read it out loud. Hold on. It was just lagging like crazy. When the seagulls cry, the crime will be solved. But, for some reason, Battler felt a slight sense of uneasiness, as if the seagulls would never cry again. That couldn't be true. When the typhoon passes, surely the lively seagulls will return to the harbor again. And you know, I think this might actually be a good stopping point for today. We've been going for almost 4 hours. So let me save real quick, and then we'll also read real quick the tip for Kanon. Nothing has changed. So he's still, he was still quote unquote alive. He was coughing his lungs out, but I thought maybe something else would have happened. So, assuming he dies right now, which is probably going to happen by the time the next part comes around, we have Genji, Kumasawa, Maria, Battler, George, Jessica, Natsuhi, and Nanjo remaining, and maybe Kinzo. So, what's that? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 of them. 9 of them. But if we look at the tips here... Huh. On the second twilight, those who remain shall tear apart the two who are close. So we know the two who are close were technically torn apart, right? They were, separated from the family as they stayed in a room by themselves. But on the third twilight, those who remain shall praise my noble name. And Kanun got stabbed in the chest, but that isn't until the fifth twilight. So what's going on here? I guess we'll find out next time. So for now, let's get ready to swap on over to the ending screen.